The train's wheels screeched against iron rails, and Clara pressed her forehead to the window, watching the last traces of civilization blur into endless grassland. 3 days of travel had left her dress wrinkled, her back aching, and her stomach twisted in knots that had nothing to do with the stale bread she'd eaten that morning. She pulled the crumpled advertisement from her pocket for the 100th time, the paper soft from constant folding. Rancher seeks honest woman for companionship and partnership. Must be willing to work. No fancy airs needed. Write to R. Hale. Black Hollow Territory. Honest woman. Clara almost laughed. If Rowan Hale knew what she really was, what she'd done, he'd throw her back on the eastbound train himself. The woman across from her, a pinch-faced matron in expensive traveling clothes, had been staring at Clara since Denver. Not subtly, either. Her eyes kept drifting to Clara's worn dress, to the way Clara's body filled the narrow seat, to the cheap carpet bag stuffed under the bench. Clara had spent 26 years learning to ignore those looks. They still burned. "Visiting family?" the woman finally asked, her tone suggesting she already knew the answer would be disappointing. "Meeting my fiancé," Clara said, keeping her voice steady. The woman's eyebrows lifted. "How fortunate." That single word carried all the judgment Clara expected. Women like her weren't supposed to find husbands. They were supposed to disappear into kitchens and back rooms, grateful for whatever scraps of dignity society tossed their way. Clara had believed that once. Before Philadelphia, before the gambling house, before Silas Crow. Her hand moved unconsciously to her waist, where the money belt pressed against her skin. $87. Everything she'd managed to steal back from Crow's office the night she ran. Not enough to cover her father's debt, not even close, but enough to make Crow send men after her. The train lurched, beginning its descent toward the valley. Through the window, Clara caught her first glimpse of Black Hollow. It wasn't a town. It was barely a settlement. A single dirt road cut between wooden buildings that looked like they'd blow over in a strong wind. No church spire, no courthouse, just raw frontier dust and desperation. Perfect. The train shuddered to a stop, steam hissing from the engine. Clara stood, her legs unsteady, and reached for her bag. The matron made a small sound of relief as Clara moved past her toward the door. The platform was empty except for a few rough-looking men unloading freight. Clara stepped down carefully, her boots sinking slightly into the dirt. The air smelled different here, dry grass, wood smoke, and something else, something metallic. That's when she heard the commotion near the station office. "Someone get the marshal. He's already here. Christ, his throat's near cut through." Clara's bag slipped from her fingers. People were running now, converging on something she couldn't quite see. Then the crowd shifted and she saw the body. A man lay sprawled on his back, arms flung wide, his shirt soaked black with blood. His mouth was open in what might have been a scream. Near his outstretched hand, a silver badge lay in the dust. The star bent at an odd angle. Clara had seen death before. Her father's slow collapse after the apoplexy. Her mother's wasting sickness. But this was different. This was violence, raw and recent. "Step back." The voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "All of you, step back now." The crowd parted, and Clara saw him. Marshal Rowan Hale wasn't what she'd imagined. The advertisement had suggested a simple rancher, maybe someone older, worn down by frontier life and looking for help around a homestead. The man walking toward the body moved like a soldier, shoulders squared, each step deliberate. He was tall, broad through the chest, with dark hair that needed cutting, and a face that looked like it had forgotten how to smile. His coat was dusty, his boots scuffed, but the gun on his hip gleamed. He knelt beside the body, his fingers moving to the dead man's neck, even though anyone could see it was pointless. His expression didn't change. No shock, no horror, just cold assessment. "Someone fetch Doc Morrison," he said without looking up, "and find me witnesses. Someone saw something." "Marshal, that's Deputy Collins." "I know who it is." Rowan's voice was flat. "Now move." Clara stood frozen on the platform, her heart hammering. This was the man she'd agreed to marry? This was the rancher looking for companionship and partnership? His head turned and their eyes met. For a moment, neither moved. Clara saw something flicker in his expression, surprise maybe, or confusion. His gaze traveled over her, taking in her rumpled dress, her unruly hair, the way she stood apart from the crowd with her carpet bag at her feet. "You're not supposed to be here until Friday," he said. Clara's throat went dry. The train schedule changed. He stood, wiping his hands on his pants, and walked toward her. Up close, he was even more intimidating. Scars marked his knuckles. An old wound traced his jawline. His eyes were the color of winter storms, gray and unforgiving. "Clara Mercer?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. "Rowan Hale." He didn't offer his hand, didn't smile, just studied her with that same cold assessment he'd given the body. "Your letters were very articulate." Because I didn't write them, Clara thought. She'd paid a girl at the boarding house to compose those letters, to make her sound educated and refined. The real Clara couldn't spell half the words the girl had used. "Thank you," she managed. "Can you ride?" "What?" "A horse. Can you ride one?" Clara's mind reeled at the sudden shift. Not well." "Cook?" "Yes." "Shoot?" "No." Rowan's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes sharpened. "You wrote that you were experienced with firearms." That damned letter. "I may have exaggerated." Exaggerated. He repeated the word like he was tasting it, finding it bitter. Behind them, men were covering the deputy's body with a canvas tarp. "What else did you exaggerate, Miss Mercer?" "Everything." "Nothing important." "Nothing important," he echoed. For a long moment, he just looked at her, and Clara felt herself shrinking under that gaze. She'd come so far, spent everything she had on this journey. If he sent her back now... "Marshal!" A young man ran up, breathing hard. "We found something. Looks like Collins was meeting someone. There's a note in his pocket." Rowan's attention snapped away from Clara. "Show me." He strode back toward the body without another word, leaving Clara standing alone on the platform with her carpet bag, and her lies, and the growing certainty that she'd made a terrible mistake. The marshal's office was a squat building at the end of the main street, identifiable only by the word law painted crookedly on the door. Rowan had told Clara to wait there while he dealt with the crime scene, his tone making it clear this wasn't a request. She sat on a wooden bench, hands folded in her lap, listening to the sounds of the town outside. Voices raised in speculation. Horses. The bang of a hammer somewhere. This place was nothing like Philadelphia, nothing like the cities she'd known, with their cobblestone streets and gas lamps and the constant press of humanity. Here, you could see clear to the horizon. Here, there was nowhere to hide. The door banged open and Rowan entered, followed by a wiry man carrying a leather bag. The second man was older, maybe 50, with spectacles and the careful movements of someone used to handling delicate things. "Doc Morrison," Rowan said by way of introduction. "This is Miss Mercer, my fiancée." The way he hesitated over that last word made Clara's stomach clench. Doc Morrison's eyebrows rose. "The one from the letters? I'll be damned. Pleased to meet you, miss." He actually seemed genuine, which threw Clara off balance. Wish it were under better circumstances. "What did you find?" Rowan asked, dropping into the chair behind his desk. He looked tired suddenly, the hard lines around his eyes more pronounced. Collins was killed sometime between midnight and dawn. Single cut, left to right, suggesting the killer was right-handed and approached from behind. Quick, professional. Doc Morrison set his bag down. He never had a chance to draw. The note? Meeting someone at the station, 2 o'clock, initial C. That's all it says. Rowan pulled a crumpled paper from his pocket and smoothed it on the desk. Clara could see the hasty scrawl from where she sat. Just a time, a place, and that single letter. C for Clara, someone said from the doorway. Clara's head snapped up. A woman stood there, maybe 30, with sharp features and sharper eyes. She wore men's clothes, trousers, and a shirt, with a gun belt slung low on her hips. Everything about her screamed confidence. That's enough, Kate, Rowan said. I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. Kate stepped inside, her boots loud on the wooden floor. Mysterious woman shows up on the same train, same time as a murder. Deputies meeting someone with the initial C. Seems like a hell of a coincidence. Clara's hands tightened in her lap. I was on the train. Convenient alibi. Kate, Rowan's voice hardened. Get out. You're making a mistake, Rowan. You don't know this woman. I said get out. Kate held his gaze for a long moment, then shook her head. Your funeral. She turned and left, slamming the door behind her. The silence that followed felt suffocating. Doc Morrison cleared his throat. I'll go prepare Collins for burial. He nodded to Clara, collected his bag, and slipped out quietly. Rowan leaned back in his chair, studying Clara with those cold eyes. Tell me why you're really here. I answered your advertisement. I know what the letter said. I'm asking what you're running from. His breath caught. Don't. He held up a hand. I've been a lawman for 8 years. I know what desperate looks like, and lady, you're drowning in it. So let's skip the dancing around. What are you afraid of? She should lie. She should make up something small, manageable, a jealous suitor, an overbearing father, something he could understand without digging deeper. Instead, she found herself saying, debt. Rowan's expression didn't change. How much? $3,000. He whistled low. That's not debt. That's a death sentence. Who holds it? Clara's hands were shaking now. She pressed them together harder. A man named Silas Crow. He runs gambling houses in Philadelphia. My father borrowed from him and couldn't pay. When my father died, Crow said the debt transferred to me. That's not how debt works. It's how Crow works. Her voice came out harder than she intended. He offered me a choice, work in one of his houses, or he'd sell the debt to someone who'd make me work anyway. I chose to run, taking his money on the way out. It wasn't a question. Clara nodded. $87. It was mine to begin with, wages he owed my father. I just took it back. Crow see it that way? No. Rowan was quiet for a long time, his fingers drumming on the desk. Finally, he said, How did you find my advertisement? A girl at the boarding house. She'd been collecting them, hoping to... Clara trailed off. She'd given up, sold them to me for 50 cents. And you picked mine because you were the farthest away. Another long silence. Clara forced herself to meet his eyes, even though every instinct screamed at her to look away. If he was going to send her back, she wanted to see it coming. I don't appreciate being lied to, Rowan said finally. Those letters made you sound like some refined Eastern lady looking for adventure. You're not that. No. You're someone who stole from a criminal and ran across half the country hoping geography would keep you safe. Yes, it won't. He stood, walking to the window. Outside, the street was emptying as evening approached. Men like Crow have long memories and longer reach. If he wants you badly enough, he'll find you. Clara's heart sank. So you're sending me back? I didn't say that. He turned to face her. I said he'll find you. I didn't say I'd let him take you. Hope flickered in her chest, painful and dangerous. Why would you help me? Because I placed that advertisement for a reason, Miss Mercer. This town needs more than just law. It needs people willing to build something, and right now you need a place where Crow can't touch you easily. He crossed his arms. Call it mutually beneficial. You don't know me. No, but I know desperate, and I know how to use it. You work hard, you learn what I teach you, and you don't lie to me again. We might make this arrangement work. And if Crow's men come, then we deal with them. His expression hardened. I didn't survive 3 years as a territorial marshal by running from fights. Clara wanted to believe him. Wanted to believe this cold, scarred man could stand between her and the monster who'd haunted her dreams for months. But belief was dangerous. Belief got you hurt. What about the deputy? She asked instead. The murder. Your friend thinks I had something to do with it. Kate's not my friend. She's the town's gunsmith, and she sees threats everywhere. Collins was killed because he was careless, met someone he shouldn't have, and paid for it. The timing of your arrival is coincidence. He paused. Unless you're about to tell me it's not. I've never killed anyone. Good. Let's keep it that way. Rowan moved to a cabinet and pulled out a ring of keys. There's a room above the general store. Widow Brennan rents it to travelers. You'll stay there tonight. And tomorrow? Tomorrow we start teaching you how to survive out here, because that fancy education in your letters won't mean much when you're facing down a rattlesnake or a man with a gun. He tossed her the keys. Get some rest, Miss Mercer. You're going to need it. The room above the general store was small but clean. A narrow bed, a washstand, a single window overlooking the street. Clara set her carpet bag down and sank onto the mattress, her legs finally giving out. What had she done? She'd fled from Crow expecting to find some simple farmer who needed a wife to cook and mend. Instead, she'd landed in a town where men died with their throats cut, where the marshal looked at her like she was a problem to be solved rather than a woman to be courted, and where suspicion followed her like a shadow. She should leave. Take what money she had left and catch the next train to somewhere, anywhere else. But where? Crow's reach extended to every major city in the east. Going west meant more frontier towns like this one, places where a woman alone was either desperate or dangerous. And Clara was tired, bone deep, soul tired of running. A knock at the door made her jump. "It's Brennan," a woman's voice called. "Brought you some supper." Clara opened the door to find a round-faced woman in her 40s holding a covered plate. The smell of fried chicken made Clara's mouth water. "Marshall said you'd be staying here," Mrs. Brennan said, bustling past her into the room. "Figured you'd be hungry after that train ride. I remember when I first came out here, thought I'd starve before we reached civilization." She set the plate on the small table. Not that Black Hollow counts as civilization, mind you, but it's better than dying of dysentery on the trail. "Thank you," Clara managed. Mrs. Brennan studied her with frank curiosity. "So you're the one Rowan's been corresponding with. He mentioned you were coming, though he didn't say much else. Man's tighter with words than a miser with coins." She smiled. "You look different than I expected." "Different how?" "Well," Mrs. Brennan hesitated, clearly trying to find diplomatic phrasing. "You look stronger, more substantial. That's good. We don't have much use for delicate flowers out here. Women need backbone to survive." It was meant kindly, Clara realized, a compliment wrapped in frontier practicality. Still, the word stung in that familiar way. The acknowledgement that she didn't fit the mold, could never fit it, no matter how hard she tried. "I'll try not to disappoint," Clara said. "Oh, honey, you already scared half the town just by showing up. Kate Donovan's convinced you're some kind of criminal, and Tom Fisher swears he saw you throw your bag down like you were ready to run. Whole place is buzzing." Mrs. Brennan laughed. "Best entertainment we've had since the Garrett boys got drunk and tried to rope a bull." "The marshal thinks I'm involved in the deputy's murder." "Does he?" Mrs. Brennan didn't seem concerned. "Rowan thinks everyone's involved in everything until he proves otherwise. Part of what makes him good at his job. Don't take it personal." She moved toward the door, then paused. "Bit of advice. Rowan's a hard man, but he's fair. He says he'll protect you. He'll protect you. But he'll expect you to pull your weight too. This isn't Philadelphia, wherever that is. Out here, everyone works or everyone suffers." After she left, Clara ate mechanically, tasting nothing. Her mind kept circling back to Rowan's cold assessment, to the body on the platform, to Kate Donovan's accusation. She'd wanted to disappear. Instead, she'd walked into a spotlight she couldn't escape. Outside her window, Black Hollow settled into night. Lanterns flickered in windows. Voices carried on the wind, laughter, arguments, the sound of living. Clara pressed her forehead against the cool glass and wondered if Crow's men were already on her trail, following the breadcrumbs she'd left from Philadelphia. And if they found her here, would this cold-eyed marshal really stand between her and death? Or would he hand her over to save his town from the trouble she'd brought to his doorstep? Clara didn't know. But as she lay down on the narrow bed, still dressed, too exhausted to even unlace her boots, she made herself a promise. She wouldn't run again. Not unless she had no choice. And if Crow's men came for her, they'd find out that the woman they'd dismissed as weak and worthless had learned something in her years of being overlooked. How to survive by any means necessary, even if it meant becoming someone she didn't recognize. Dawn broke over Black Hollow with the subtlety of a gunshot. Clara woke to hammering, someone repairing a roof maybe, or building something new. The sound drove into her skull like nails. She'd barely slept, spending most of the night staring at the ceiling and listening to every creak in the building, every voice passing on the street below. She dressed in the same wrinkled clothes from yesterday, splashed water on her face from the basin, and tried to do something with her hair. The mirror above the washstand showed her exactly what she expected. A woman who looked tired, rumpled, and out of place. The kind of woman people noticed for all the wrong reasons. Downstairs, the general store was already open. A thin man with nervous hands stood behind the counter, weighing out flour for an older woman Clara didn't recognize. Both of them stopped talking when she appeared, their eyes tracking her movements as she crossed to the door. "Morning," the man said, too cheerfully. "You're the marshal's, fiancé," Clara supplied, the words still feeling foreign in her mouth. Right. "Thomas Fisher. I run the store. Anything you need, you just ask." His smile was tight. "We're all real friendly here in Black Hollow." The old woman made a sound that might have been agreement or might have been something else entirely. Clara nodded and escaped into the street before either of them could say more. The morning air was cold enough to bite. Clara wrapped her shawl tighter and looked around, trying to orient herself. In daylight, Black Hollow was even less impressive than it had seemed from the train. Maybe 24 buildings lined the main street, most of them wood, some showing signs of weathering that suggested they'd been here a while. A saloon, a gunsmith shop with Kate Donovan's name painted on the window, a boarding house that looked like it had seen better days. And at the far end, the marshal's office with its crooked sign. People were starting their day, men hauling water, women sweeping stoops, a boy leading a mule toward what looked like a stable. Every single one of them stared at Clara as she walked past. Some were curious, others were hostile, none were welcoming. She found Rowan behind the office, working with a horse in a small corral. The animal was young, skittish, dancing away every time Rowan approached with the saddle blanket. He moved patiently, speaking in low tones Clara couldn't quite hear, waiting for the horse to settle before trying again. "You're up early," he said without turning around. "Couldn't sleep." "Get used to it. Out here, you sleep when you can, not when you're comfortable." He finally got the blanket across the horse's back, his movement steady and sure. "Come here." Clara climbed over the fence rail, her skirt catching on the rough wood. The horse's ears flicked toward her, its eyes rolling white. "She doesn't like me," Clara said. "She doesn't know you. There's a difference." Rowan beckoned her closer. "Hold out your hand, flat. Let her smell you." Clara did, her heart hammering as the horse stretched its neck toward her, nostrils flaring. The animal's breath was hot against her palm. Then, almost delicately, it lipped at her fingers, searching for treats that weren't there. "Good," Rowan said. "Now keep talking to her while I get the saddle." "What should I say?" "Doesn't matter. She's listening to your tone, not your words." Clara felt ridiculous standing there, murmuring nonsense to a horse while Rowan hefted a saddle from the fence post. But the animal seemed calmer, its ears swiveling toward Clara's voice, and when Rowan eased the saddle onto its back, it only shifted its weight instead of bolting. "You said you can't ride well," Rowan said, tightening the cinch. "Define well." "I rode once, at a fair. I fell off." "Fantastic." He didn't sound surprised. "We'll start with the basics then. Getting on, staying on, and not breaking your neck. Everything else comes after." "Now? You have somewhere else to be?" He led the horse toward her, reins in hand. "This is Willow. She's young and stupid, which makes her perfect for teaching. She'll forgive your mistakes because she's making her own." Clara looked at the horse, at the saddle that suddenly seemed impossibly high, and felt her stomach clench. "I'll just slow you down." "Probably." Rowan's expression didn't change. "But you can't stay in Black Hollow forever. Eventually you'll need to go somewhere, and out here, that means riding. So you learn now, while it's safe, or you learn later when it's not." He gestured to the stirrup. "Your choice." It wasn't really a choice. Clara gathered her skirt as best she could and tried to figure out how to get her foot into the stirrup without falling over. Rowan watched her struggle for exactly 10 seconds before sighing. "Other foot," he said. "And you need to face the horse's rear, not its head." Her face burned. "I knew that. Clearly." But he held the stirrup steady for her, and when she finally managed to haul herself up, graceless, panting, her leg muscles screaming, he didn't comment on how hard she'd made it look. The view from horseback was different, higher, more precarious. Clara gripped the saddle horn with both hands, her knuckles white. "Reins," Rowan said, holding them up. "You steer with these, not with prayers." "I wasn't praying." "Good. Because if you fall off, prayers won't help you." He placed the leather straps in her hands, adjusting her grip. Gentle pressure. "You're not trying to hurt her, just guide her. Think of it like asking instead of demanding." For the next hour, Rowan walked beside her while Willow plodded in circles around the corral. He corrected Clara's posture, her grip, the way she held her weight. Every mistake earned a terse comment. Every small improvement went unacknowledged. By the time he finally let her dismount, Clara's legs were shaking and her pride was in tatters. "Tomorrow we do it again," Rowan said, taking Willow's reins. "And the day after that. Eventually, your body will remember what your brain keeps forgetting." How encouraging. "I'm not here to encourage you, Miss Mercer. I'm here to make sure you don't die stupidly." He started leading the horse toward the stable, then paused. "Can you shoot at all? You said no yesterday, but I need to know if you meant no or poorly." Clara thought of her father's old pistol, the one she'd tried to fire exactly once in the alley behind their boarding house. The recoil had nearly broken her wrist, and she'd missed the bottle she'd been aiming at by 3 feet. "Poorly," she admitted. "Then that's next. After breakfast." Breakfast turned out to be salt pork and coffee so strong it could strip paint, eaten standing up in the marshal's office while Rowan sorted through papers on his desk. He worked with fierce concentration, his jaw tight, occasionally making notes in handwriting that was surprisingly neat for a man who looked like he'd rather be punching something. "The deputy?" Clara said finally, unable to stand the silence. "Have you found out who killed him?" "Working on it." "That's not an answer." Rowan looked up, his eyes sharp. "No, it's not. Because I don't know yet, and guessing gets people killed." He set down his pen. "Collins was meeting someone. The note said 2 o'clock, but he was killed hours before that, which means either he went early or the meeting time was meant to throw me off. Or someone else found out about the meeting and got there first." "That too." He studied her for a moment. "You think about these things, motives, timing. Why?" "Because I spent 2 years watching Crow's men operate," Clara thought. "Because when you're surrounded by criminals, you learn to think like them, or you don't survive." But she couldn't say that without revealing more than she wanted. "It just seems logical," she said instead. Rowan's expression suggested he didn't believe her, but he let it drop. Collins had gambling debts. Not unusual. Half the men in this territory owe money to someone. But he'd been acting strange the past few weeks. Jumpy. Looking over his shoulder. "You think someone was pressuring him?" "I think he made a deal he couldn't keep." Rowan stood, reaching for his gun belt. "Which is why I need to ride out to the Garrett Ranch today. Collins spent time out there recently, and I want to know why. I'll come with you." "No." "You said I need to learn to ride." "I said you need to learn not to fall off. That's different from spending 6 hours on horseback crossing open range." He buckled the belt, checking his pistol with practiced efficiency. "You'll stay here. Mrs. Brennan needs help at the store, and Kate could use an extra pair of hands at the smithy." Clara's jaw tightened. "You're keeping me busy so I don't cause trouble." "I'm keeping you useful so the town doesn't decide you're a problem." His tone made it clear this wasn't up for discussion. "People here are suspicious of strangers, Miss Mercer. They're even more suspicious of strangers who show up at the same time as a murder. You want them to trust you? Prove you're willing to work." He left before she could argue, his boots loud on the wooden floor, the door closing with a finality that felt like judgment. Clara stood alone in the office, surrounded by wanted posters and maps and the lingering smell of gun oil, and felt the walls pressing in. She'd fled across the country to escape being controlled by men like Crow, only to land in the hands of another man who expected obedience without question. The difference, she told herself, was that Rowan wasn't trying to own her. He was trying to keep her alive. She hoped that difference mattered. The gunsmith shop smelled like metal and fire. Kate Donovan stood at an anvil, hammer in hand, working a piece of iron that glowed red hot. She didn't look up when Clara entered, just kept striking the metal with precise, powerful blows that sent sparks flying. "Marshall sent you," Kate said between strikes. Not a question. "He said you might need help." "Did he?" Kate plunged the iron into a bucket of water. Steam hissed up, and she finally turned to face Clara, wiping soot from her forehead. "What I need is for people to stop lying to me." "You good at that?" Clara kept her voice steady. "I didn't kill the deputy." "Didn't ask if you did. Asked if you're good at not lying." Kate set the hammer down, her eyes hard. "Rowan's a smart man, but he's got a blind spot when it comes to people who look helpless. Brings out his protective streak. Problem is, the most dangerous people are usually the ones who seem harmless." You think I'm dangerous. I think you're hiding something. Everyone in this territory is hiding something. It's why they came here. But most of them aren't hiding it behind big eyes and a sad story about needing a fresh start. Kate crossed her arms. So yeah, I think you're dangerous. Question is, what kind of dangerous? The kind that brings trouble to herself, or the kind that brings it to everyone around her? Clara wanted to argue, to defend herself, but Kate's words cut too close to the truth. She was bringing trouble. Crow wouldn't stop looking. His men would follow the trail eventually, and when they did, this town would pay the price for sheltering her. I don't want anyone to get hurt, Clara said quietly. Then you should have stayed where you were. Kate turned back to her forge, picking up another piece of iron. But since you're here, make yourself useful. There's a crate of gun parts in the back that needs sorting. Think you can manage that without shooting yourself? It was dismissal disguised as a task. Clara took it, retreating to the back room where dust motes floated in shafts of sunlight and metal pieces lay scattered across a workbench like puzzle pieces waiting to be assembled. She worked mechanically, sorting springs from firing pins, triggers from hammers, trying not to think about Kate's words or Rowan's cold practicality or the growing certainty that she'd made everything worse by coming here. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher, and through the shop's open door, Clara could hear the sounds of Black Hollow conducting its business. Wagon wheels, voices, the occasional bark of a dog. Normal sounds. The sounds of people living lives uncomplicated by debts and violence and secrets that could get them killed. You're crying, Kate said from the doorway. Clara touched her face, surprised to find it wet. I'm fine. Sure you are. Kate leaned against the doorframe, her expression unreadable. Look, I don't know your story, and I don't particularly care. But Rowan's putting his neck out for you, which means the rest of us are too, whether we like it or not. So whatever you're running from, it better be worth it. It's not, Clara said. The words came out before she could stop them. It's not worth anything, but I didn't have another choice. Kate was quiet for a moment, then she sighed, pushing off the doorframe. Come on. If you're going to be useless and weepy, you might as well learn something. She gestured toward the front of the shop. Time to teach you which end of a gun is which. The lessons were brutal. Kate had no patience for mistakes, and even less for fear. She showed Clara how to hold a pistol, how to sight down the barrel, how to squeeze the trigger instead of jerking it. Every time Clara flinched at the recoil, Kate made her do it again. Every time she missed the target, a collection of bottles and cans set up in the yard behind the shop, Kate's commentary grew more cutting. You're thinking too much, Kate said after Clara's 10th shot went wide. Your brain's getting in the way. Stop trying to be perfect and just shoot. I can't, or won't. Kate reloaded the pistol with quick, practiced movements. Because there's a difference. Can't means you're physically unable. Won't means you're scared. Which one is it? Clara's hands were shaking. Her ears rang from the gunfire. Every part of her wanted to set the weapon down and walk away. But something in Kate's expression, not mockery, but challenge, made her grip the pistol tighter. Won't, she admitted. Good. Fear's honest. Kate stepped behind her, adjusting Clara's stance. Now stop letting it win. The next shot hit the edge of a bottle. Not a kill shot, not even a good shot, but contact. The bottle rocked on its perch, and Kate made a sound that might have been approval. Again, she said. By the time Rowan returned, Clara's shoulder was bruised from recoil. Her hands were black with powder residue, and she'd successfully hit 3 targets out of 20 attempts. Kate seemed to consider this an acceptable ratio. She's terrible, Kate reported as Rowan dismounted in front of the shop, but she kept trying, which is more than I expected. Rowan looked at Clara, taking in her disheveled state, and something that might have been amusement flickered in his eyes. Learn anything? That I'm terrible at shooting, Clara said. Then you learned something true. That's progress. He handed his horse's reins to a boy who'd appeared from somewhere, tossing him a coin. Walk with me, Miss Mercer. They headed toward the edge of town where the buildings gave way to open grassland. The sun was starting its descent, painting the sky in shades of copper and gold. In different circumstances, it might have been beautiful. Right now, it just made Clara aware of how exposed everything was out here, how far you could see in every direction, how impossible it would be to hide. The Garrett Ranch was interesting, Rowan said. Collins had been there 3 times in the past month, always at night, always meeting with the same person. Who? James Garrett's younger brother, Michael. He's 20, stupid, and up to his neck in debt from poker games in the next territory over. Rowan's jaw tightened. He was paying Collins to look the other way while he moved stolen cattle. So Collins was corrupt. Collins was desperate. There's a difference, though the end result's the same. They stopped at the edge of town, looking out across the darkening plains. Michael says Collins wanted out. Said the arrangement was getting too risky, too many people asking questions. Michael didn't take it well. Clara's stomach sank. You think Michael killed him? I think Michael hired someone to kill him. The boy doesn't have the spine to cut a man's throat himself. Rowan turned to face her. Which brings me to a problem. Michael's brother James is one of the most powerful ranchers in this territory. He's got men, money, and influence. If I arrest Michael, James will make trouble. If I don't, everyone in Black Hollow will know the law means nothing against the rich. What are you going to do? What I always do. My job. But his expression was grim. It's going to get ugly, Miss Mercer. The Garretts won't go quietly, and when the dust settles, this town's going to need people willing to stand firm. That's why I needed you working today. Not just to keep you busy, but to show everyone you're not some delicate eastern flower who'll scatter at the first sign of trouble. I'm not, Clara said. Then prove it. He started walking back toward town. Because in 3 days, I'm riding to the Garrett Ranch with a warrant, and when I do, you're going to be standing in that office window where everyone can see you, showing them that the marshal's woman doesn't run. The marshal's woman. The words settled over Clara like a brand, marking her as something she wasn't sure she wanted to be. But Rowan was already walking away, his shoulders squared against whatever storm was coming, and Clara realized she'd been given her first real test, not of her shooting or riding or usefulness, but of her willingness to stand visible when every instinct screamed at her to hide. The next 3 days passed in a blur of painful lessons. Clara spent mornings with Rowan learning to ride, her thighs screaming in protest as Willow carried her in wider and wider circles around the corral. She spent afternoons with Kate, her aim improving incrementally while her respect for the other woman grew despite herself. Kate was harsh, uncompromising, and had no interest in being liked. But she was honest in a way Clara found almost refreshing after years of navigating Crow's web of lies. Evenings, Clara helped Mrs. Brennan at the store, learning the strange currency of frontier trade. Who could be trusted for credit, who needed watching, which families were one bad harvest from starvation. The work was exhausting, but it kept her hands busy, and her mind from circling back to the question of when, not if, Crow's men would arrive. On the second evening, Mrs. Brennan taught her to make biscuits that didn't taste like hardtack, and Clara found herself laughing at the older woman's stories about her early days in Black Hollow. It felt strange, that laughter. Foreign, like a language she'd forgotten how to speak. You're settling in, Mrs. Brennan observed, watching Clara knead dough. Looking less like a scared rabbit every day. I don't feel less scared. Nobody does. That's the secret. We're all just pretending we know what we're doing until it becomes true. She patted Clara's hand with flour-dusty fingers. You're stronger than you think, girl. I can see it. Question is whether you can. Clara wanted to believe her, but belief required trust, and trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. On the morning of the third day, Rowan came to collect her before dawn. He looked like he hadn't slept, his eyes shadowed, his jaw tight with tension. It's today, he said simply. Get dressed. I need you at the office by sunrise. Clara dressed in near darkness, her hands fumbling with buttons and laces. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was it, the moment when Black Hollow would see whether she was worth the trouble she'd brought. The marshal's office was cold when they arrived, the stove unlit. Rowan moved through the space with practiced efficiency, checking his weapons, gathering papers, moving like a man preparing for battle. You'll stay here, he said, not looking at her. Don't leave. Don't hide in the back room. I want you visible. If anyone asks where I've gone, you tell them I'm conducting official business and I'll return when it's done. What if something goes wrong? Then Kate will come get you, and you'll follow her instructions without argument. He finally looked at her, his expression harder than she'd ever seen it. This isn't about you today, Miss Mercer. It's about whether this town stands for law or money. But your presence matters. The Garretts know you're here. They'll be watching to see if you bolt when things get dangerous. I won't. We'll see. He moved toward the door, then paused. That money belt you're wearing, the one with Crow's money in it. If something happens to me, you take it and run. Don't wait. Don't try to be noble, just go. The words hit Clara like a slap. He knew, had known from the beginning. I'm a lawman, Miss Mercer. I notice things. A ghost of something that might have been humor touched his face. But that's a problem for later. Right now, I've got a rich man's son to arrest. He left, and Clara was alone in the office, with the weight of his words settling around her like chains. The morning crawled past. Clara sat in the chair by the window, visible as commanded, watching Black Hollow wake up. People passed on the street, some nodding to her, others pointedly ignoring her presence. Kate appeared around mid-morning, leaning in the doorway with her arms crossed. He'll be back, Kate said. Rowan's too stubborn to die. You don't know that. No. But I know he's the best lawman this territory's ever had. And if anyone can walk into the Garrett Ranch and walk out with a prisoner, it's him. She tilted her head. You care about him. It wasn't a question, but Clara answered anyway. I barely know him. That's not what I asked. Clara looked down at her hands, twisted in her lap. He's the first person in years who's looked at me and seen something other than a problem to solve or a body to use. So yes, I suppose I care. Kate was quiet for a moment, then she said, he sees potential. That's his gift and his curse. He looks at broken things and believes they can be fixed. Her expression softened slightly. Just don't prove him wrong. She left, and Clara returned to waiting. Noon came and went. Clara's stomach twisted with hunger she couldn't satisfy. Mrs. Brennan brought soup that Clara couldn't eat. The shadows stretched longer, and still Rowan didn't return. By late afternoon, Clara's nerves were frayed to breaking. Every sound made her jump. Every rider in the distance made her heart leap. Kate had come back twice, saying nothing, just checking that Clara was still there, still visible, still keeping her vigil. Then, as the sun painted the western sky in shades of blood and fire, horses appeared on the horizon. 4 riders. Clara stood, her hands gripping the window frame so hard the wood dug into her palms. She couldn't see faces yet, couldn't tell if Rowan was among them, but something about the way they rode, purposeful, controlled, made her breath catch. People were coming out of buildings now, gathering in the street. Claire could see Mrs. Brennan, Kate, Thomas Fisher, all of them watching as the riders approached. The tension was thick enough to choke on. Then they were close enough to identify. Rowan rode in front, straight-backed and grim. Behind him, hands bound and flanked by 2 men Clara didn't recognize, was a young man who had to be Michael Garrett. He looked terrified and furious in equal measure, his face blotchy with emotion. They stopped in front of the office. Rowan dismounted, his movements deliberate, and hauled Michael down from his horse less gently than necessary. Inside, Rowan said, his voice carrying in the evening air. Now. He shoved Michael through the office door, and Clara stepped back hastily as the prisoner stumbled in, followed by Rowan and his deputies. Michael's eyes found Clara immediately, narrowing with hatred. This is because of her, Michael spat. Everyone knows she's the reason Collins is dead, but you're too busy protecting your whore to see it. Rowan's fist caught Michael in the stomach, doubling him over. The marshal's expression never changed. Deputy Williams, put him in the cell, Rowan said calmly, and if he speaks again without being addressed, gag him. They dragged Michael into the back room where the cells were. Clara heard the clang of bars, the rattle of chains, and Michael's muffled curses. Then Rowan was back, dismissing his deputies with terse thanks. And suddenly the office was quiet, except for the 2 of them, and the prisoner breathing heavily in the next room. You stayed, Rowan said. Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. Good. He moved to his desk, sinking into the chair like a man who'd aged years in a single day. James Garrett will come tomorrow. With lawyers, probably some hired guns. He'll try to intimidate me into releasing his brother. When he does, I need you to be here again, visible, unwavering. Why does it matter if I'm here? Because you're leverage I didn't plan on but can use anyway. He looked at her and his eyes were exhausted. Garrett will try to attack through you. He'll question your character, your past, suggest you're the real criminal, and you're going to stand there and take it without flinching, because if you break, He wins. Clara's throat was tight. You're asking me to be bait. I'm asking you to be strong. He leaned back, closing his eyes. There's a difference. That night, Clara lay in her narrow bed above the store and stared at the ceiling, knowing sleep wouldn't come. Tomorrow, everything she'd been running from would be dragged into the light. James Garrett would investigate. He'd find out about Philadelphia, about Crow, about the stolen money and the forged letters and every lie she'd built her escape on. And when he did, Rowan would know the full truth. The question was whether he'd still stand by her after that, or whether he'd realize she was exactly what Michael Garrett had called her, a problem that needed solving, preferably by sending her back to face the monsters she'd fled. Clara didn't know. But as the first light of dawn crept through her window, she made herself get up, get dressed, and walk back to that office window where the whole town could watch her face whatever came next. Because Rowan had asked her to be strong, and she was tired of being anything else. James Garrett arrived at noon with the precision of a man who understood the power of timing. Clara watched from the window as his carriage rolled into Black Hollow, pulled by matched horses that probably cost more than most families earned in a year. Behind the carriage rode 6 men, all armed, all wearing the hard expressions of men paid to intimidate. The street had been busy moments before. Now it emptied like water through a sieve, people retreating into doorways and buildings, watching from windows the way Clara watched. Only Kate Donovan remained visible, standing in front of her shop with arms crossed, her hip cocked in a posture that managed to be both casual and threatening. Rowan stood on the office steps waiting. He'd been there since dawn, refusing Clara's offer of coffee, refusing to sit, just standing like a statue carved from stone and stubbornness. He hadn't slept either. Clara could see it in the tightness around his eyes, but he wore his exhaustion like armor, refusing to let it show as weakness. The carriage stopped. A man climbed out, and Clara understood immediately why people feared James Garrett. He wasn't particularly tall or physically imposing. What he had was presence, the kind of absolute certainty that came from never being told no, never being denied, never facing consequences for anything he'd done. His suit was expensive, his boots polished, and his face held the pleasant expression of a man about to enjoy himself. "Marshal Hale," Garrett said, his voice carrying easily, "I believe you have something of mine." "I have a prisoner accused of conspiracy to commit murder," Rowan replied. "If that's yours, we need to have a different conversation." Garrett's smile didn't waver. "My brother is a boy who made poor choices. Boys do that. It doesn't warrant the theatrical arrest you performed yesterday. He hired someone to kill a deputy. That warrants a rope." Allegedly. Garrett climbed the steps slowly, his men fanning out behind him. "I'd like to see him. Family visit. Surely that's permitted under your territorial law." Rowan's jaw tightened, but he stepped aside. 10 minutes. "My deputies stay in the room." They filed into the office, and Clara found herself pressed against the wall as the space filled with bodies and tension. Garrett's eyes found her immediately, sweeping over her with the kind of assessment a man might give livestock at market. "And who is this?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. "Clara Mercer," Rowan said. "My fiancée." "Ah, yes. The mysterious woman from Philadelphia." Garrett's smile widened. "I've heard quite a bit about you, Miss Mercer. How you arrived the same day poor Deputy Collins was murdered. How you answered an advertisement under somewhat urgent circumstances. How very little anyone knows about your background." Clara's heart hammered, but she kept her voice steady. "I'm not sure what any of that has to do with your brother's crimes." "Crimes? Such a harsh word." Garrett turned to Rowan. "You see, Marshal, I've taken the liberty of making some inquiries, sent a few telegrams east. Very enlightening responses. Would you like to hear what I learned about your bride-to-be?" Rowan's expression didn't change. "Not particularly. But I insist." Garrett pulled a folded paper from his pocket. "It seems Miss Mercer left Philadelphia in quite a hurry. Something about debts owed to a gentleman named Silas Crow. Substantial debts. The kind of debts that make people desperate. The kind that might lead someone to, say, arrange the murder of a lawman who'd discovered their true identity." The office went silent. Clara felt every eye on her, felt the weight of accusation pressing down until she could barely breathe. This was it, the moment she'd been dreading, the past catching up despite all her running. "That's an interesting story," Rowan said calmly. "Got any proof?" I have sworn statements from Crow's associates in Philadelphia. They're quite clear that Miss Mercer stole money from their employer before fleeing west. Sworn statements from criminals. Rowan's tone was dismissive. Worth about as much as the paper they're written on. Anything else? Garrett's smile slipped slightly. You're protecting her. Why? Because she's sharing your bed? Because she's under my protection, which is more than I can say for your brother right now. Rowan gestured toward the cells. You wanted to see him. Go see him. Your 10 minutes started when you walked in. For a moment, Clara thought Garrett might push harder. His eyes moved between her and Rowan, calculating, searching for leverage. Then he nodded, still smiling that pleasant smile, and moved toward the back room where Michael waited. The deputies followed, leaving Clara and Rowan alone with two of Garrett's men, who positioned themselves by the door like sentries. He's going to destroy me, Clara whispered. He'll send those statements to territorial authorities, and they'll investigate, and they'll find exactly what I've already found, Rowan said quietly. A woman running from an illegal debt, trying to survive. That's not a crime in this territory. The money was stolen from you first, your father's wages. You took back what was owed. He finally looked at her, and something in his expression had softened. I'm not blind, Miss Mercer. I knew what you were from the moment you stepped off that train. Question is whether you trust me to handle it. Clara wanted to trust him, but trust meant vulnerability, and vulnerability got you hurt. Why are you doing this? Because Garrett thinks he can use you against me, and I don't respond well to threats. His voice hardened again. Also because his brother hired a killer, and I don't give a damn how much money his family has. Nobody gets to murder lawmen in my territory without consequences. From the back room came raised voices. James Garrett and his brother, the words muffled but the anger clear. Then Garrett emerged, his pleasant expression gone, replaced by something colder and far more dangerous. My brother maintains his innocence, Garrett said. He claims you have no evidence beyond the word of ranch hands who'd say anything to avoid prosecution themselves. Then he can maintain that innocence in front of a territorial judge. Rowan crossed his arms. Trial set for 2 weeks from today. Until then, he stays in that cell. 2 weeks. Garrett's eyes narrowed. That's time enough for all sorts of unfortunate accidents to happen, Marshal. To property, to people, to women who don't belong in places they shouldn't be. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Clara's hands clenched at her sides, but before she could speak, Rowan stepped forward, closing the distance between himself and Garrett until they were nearly nose to nose. Let me be clear, Rowan said, his voice deadly quiet. If anything happens to anyone in this town between now and that trial, I will personally ride to your ranch with every deputy I can muster and burn it to the ground. Your cattle, your house, your barns, all of it. And then I'll arrest you for conspiracy and let you share your brother's cell while you wait for the judge. Are we understood? For the first time, Garrett's composure cracked. Rage flickered across his face, quickly masked, but not quickly enough. You're making a mistake, Hale. I've made plenty. This isn't one of them. Rowan moved to the door, opening it. Your 10 minutes are up. Get out of my town. Garrett left without another word, his men following. Through the window, Clara watched them climb into the carriage and ride away, leaving nothing behind but dust and the certain knowledge that this was far from over. The office felt larger somehow with them gone, though the tension remained. Rowan moved to his desk, his shoulders finally sagging slightly, and Clara saw the exhaustion he'd been hiding. He meant it, she said, about the accidents. I know. Rowan rubbed his eyes. Garrett doesn't make empty threats. He'll try something, probably soon, probably aimed at me or you or both, which is why we're going to do something that'll either solve this problem or make it considerably worse. What? He looked at her, and something in his expression made Clara's breath catch. We're going to get married. Today? Right now. Publicly. Clara stared at him. You're not serious. Completely serious. He stood, reaching for his coat. Right now, you're a woman with a questionable past who might be involved in a murder. That makes you vulnerable. But if you're my wife, legally, publicly, in front of witnesses, that changes everything. Garrett can't touch you without going through me, and more importantly, it sends a message to this town that I'm not backing down. That's insane. Probably. He was already moving toward the door. But it's also tactical. Garrett thinks he can divide us, use you as leverage. He's wrong. This removes that option. Rowan, Clara's mind reeled. We barely know each other. This isn't what you wanted when you placed that advertisement. No, I wanted a partner to help run a ranch and maybe provide some companionship. What I got was a woman running from criminals, arriving at the same time as a murder, and now standing in the middle of a war between me and the most powerful rancher in the territory. He actually smiled, brief and sharp. But I've worked with worse odds. This isn't a joke. I'm not joking. The smile faded. Look, Miss Mercer, Clara, I'm not asking you to love me. I'm not even asking you to stay after this is over, if you don't want to. But right now, today, the best protection I can offer you is my name and the badge that comes with it. So yes, I'm asking you to marry me. Not because of romance or feelings or any of that, but because it's the smart tactical choice that keeps you alive. Clara's throat was tight. This wasn't how she'd imagined marriage. Not that she'd let herself imagine it much. The practical part of her brain, the part that had kept her alive through years with Crow, understood Rowan's logic. But something else twisted in her chest, something that felt uncomfortably like hope. And if I say no, then I'll protect you anyway as best I can. But it'll be harder, and Garrett will have more room to maneuver. He held out his hand. Your choice, Clara. Always your choice. She looked at his hand, scarred knuckles, calluses, the hand of a man who'd fought and worked and survived. A hand offering not love, but partnership, protection, a chance to stop running, even if just for a moment. Clara took it. The ceremony, if it could be called that, took place an hour later in the center of Black Hollow's main street. Rowan had insisted on public, and what was more public than stopping traffic and gathering the entire town as witnesses? Doc Morrison performed the brief service, reading from a battered book of legal codes since Black Hollow had no proper minister. Mrs. Brennan stood as witness, beaming like this was a real wedding instead of a strategic alliance. Kate Donovan watched from her shop doorway, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. And Clara stood next to Rowan, feeling the weight of every stare, every whisper, every judgment from people who saw a desperate woman and a marshal making a choice that would ripple through this town in ways none of them could predict. Do you, Rowan Hale, take this woman as your lawfully wedded wife? Doc Morrison asked. I do. No hesitation. No doubt. And do you, Clara Mercer, take this man as your lawfully wedded husband? Clara's voice came out smaller than she intended. I do. Then by the authority vested in me by the territorial government, I pronounce you married. Marshal, you may kiss your bride if you're so inclined. Rowan looked at her, a question in his eyes. Clara nodded, just barely, and he leaned in, pressing his lips to hers in a kiss that was brief, chaste, and somehow more binding than any vow. It tasted like dust and coffee and desperation, and when he pulled back, Clara saw something in his face that might have been determination or might have been fear. There, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Anyone who has a problem with my wife can take it up with me directly. The crowd was silent. Then Mrs. Brennan started clapping, and a few others joined in, tentative at first, then growing stronger. Not everyone applauded. Clara saw the skeptical faces, the people who'd never accept her, but enough did that it felt like maybe, possibly, she'd been granted something resembling acceptance. Kate pushed off her doorway and walked over, studying Clara with those sharp eyes. Well, didn't see that coming. Congratulations, I suppose. You think we're fools, Clara said. I think you're desperate, he's stubborn, and together you might be either brilliant or dead by next week. Kate almost smiled. Time will tell which. They spent the rest of the day making arrangements. Rowan had a small house at the edge of town, more of a cabin, really, that he'd been using when he wasn't sleeping at the office. He brought Clara there as the sun began its descent, carrying her single carpet bag like it weighed nothing. The house was sparse. A main room with a stove and table, a bedroom barely large enough for the narrow bed, a washroom that looked like it had been added as an afterthought. Everything was clean, but worn, functional, without any attempt at comfort. It's not much, Rowan said, setting her bag down. I've been meaning to fix it up, but I'm not here often enough to bother. It's fine. Clara looked around, trying to picture herself living here, sleeping in that bed, sharing space with this man she'd married for protection rather than love. Where will you sleep? Office, mostly. Someone needs to watch the prisoner. He paused. But I'll be here sometimes. For appearances, if nothing else. People will expect to see us together. Right. Appearances. Clara sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly exhausted. The day had been too much. Garrett's threats, the impromptu wedding, the weight of decisions made in haste that couldn't be unmade. Thank you for this, for everything. Don't thank me yet. This might be the worst decision either of us have made. But his tone was gentler than his words. Get some rest, Clara. Tomorrow things are going to get complicated. He left before she could ask what he meant, the door closing quietly behind him. Clara sat alone in the growing darkness, her wedding day ending not with celebration, but with solitude, and wondered what fresh hell tomorrow would bring. She didn't have to wait long to find out. The attack came 3 days later in the small hours before dawn when the town was darkest and most vulnerable. Clara woke to the smell of smoke and the sound of screaming. She stumbled from bed, pulling on her dress with shaking hands, and ran outside. The stable at the far end of town was burning, flames reaching toward the sky, and people were running with buckets, trying to contain the blaze before it spread to other buildings. Clara! Kate appeared out of the chaos, her face streaked with soot. Where's Rowan? The office. He was watching the prisoner. He's not there. The cell's empty. Someone broke Michael Garrett out. Clara's blood went cold. When? Sometime in the last hour. They hit the stable first as a distraction, then went for the jail while everyone was fighting the fire. Kate grabbed Clara's arm. We need to find Rowan, now. They ran through the smoke-filled streets, Kate shouting orders to men with buckets, organizing them with the efficiency of someone who'd fought fires before. The marshal's office door hung open, and inside chaos reigned. The cell door was twisted off its hinges, papers were scattered everywhere. And on the desk, written in what looked like blood, was a single word: whore. Clara's hands shook. This is because of me. Garrett did this to punish Rowan for arresting his brother, Kate interrupted. Don't flatter yourself. This was always coming. You're just convenient. She moved through the office, checking for signs of struggle. No blood except what they used for their little message. Rowan wasn't here when they came, or they would have killed him. Then where is he? That's the question. Kate straightened, her expression grim. And we better find the answer before Garrett does. They found him an hour later, unconscious in an alley behind the saloon. Someone had hit him from behind, probably while he'd been checking the fire, and left him bleeding in the dirt. Doc Morrison worked over him while Clara knelt beside him, her hands hovering uselessly, wanting to help but not knowing how. He'll live, Doc Morrison said finally, wrapping bandages around Rowan's head. Concussion, maybe worse. He needs rest. He needs to wake up, Kate said, because Garrett's men are out there with his brother, and when Rowan opens his eyes, he's going to want to go after them. She was right. When Rowan finally stirred, his first words were, Michael? Gone, Clara said. They broke him out during the fire. Rowan tried to sit up, winced, and Kate pushed him back down. You're not riding anywhere, Marshal, not with your head cracked open. Then deputize someone. His voice was rough with pain. Garrett needs to know this won't stand. I'll go, Clara heard herself say. Everyone turned to stare at her. Kate's eyebrows rose. Doc Morrison looked shocked. Rowan's expression was unreadable. No, he said finally. Why not? You've been teaching me to ride. Kate's been teaching me to shoot. You said yourself that I need to prove I'm not helpless. Clara's jaw set. Let me prove it. By riding into Garrett's ranch with guns? Rowan shook his head, then winced at the movement. That's suicide. Not if I don't go alone. Not if I go with deputies and make it clear that I'm there as your representative. Clara looked at Kate. Tell him it's smart. Kate was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, It's not smart, but it might work. Garrett thinks he can intimidate us through you. This flips that script, shows him we're not afraid. It also puts her directly in danger, Rowan argued. We're all in danger, Clara said. He burned our stable. He freed a murderer. He's going to keep escalating until someone stops him. Let it be us. Rowan studied her face, and Clara saw the war happening behind his eyes, the desire to protect her battling with the knowledge that she was right. Finally, he nodded, just barely. Kate goes with you, and Deputy Williams and Deputy Foster. 4 of you, armed, visible. His voice hardened. You deliver a message from me to James Garrett. You tell him that his brother committed a crime, escaped custody, and is now a fugitive. Anyone harboring him is subject to arrest. Anyone interfering with lawful recapture will be charged as an accessory. And if I find out he was behind the attack on my office, I'll see him hang alongside his brother. That'll start a war, Doc Morrison said quietly. The war's already started. Rowan closed his eyes, exhaustion and pain finally overwhelming him. We're just making sure Garrett knows we're fighting back. They rode out at first light, Clara, Kate, and 2 deputies whose names Clara could barely remember through her fear. The Garrett Ranch was 6 hours away, across open grassland that offered no cover, no protection. Every mile felt like riding toward execution. But Clara kept her back straight and her hands steady on the reins, channeling every lesson Rowan had taught her about staying on a horse, every word Kate had said about not letting fear control her. If this was how she died, she'd die looking like someone who belonged here, someone who'd earned her place through more than desperation and lies. The Garrett Ranch appeared on the horizon around noon, sprawling buildings, corrals full of cattle, men moving with the casual confidence of people who believed themselves untouchable. They saw the riders coming and gathered in front of the main house, a wall of armed men blocking the path. James Garrett stood in the center, smiling that same pleasant smile Clara had seen in Rowan's office. Mrs. Hale. What an unexpected pleasure. The title still felt strange, but Clara used it like armor. I'm here on behalf of Marshal Hale. I heard he had an unfortunate accident. Such a dangerous job, law enforcement. Not an accident, an attack. One that freed a prisoner and destroyed town property. Clara's voice was steadier than she felt. The marshal wants you to know that your brother is now a fugitive. Anyone harboring him will be arrested. Arrested by whom? Your husband's laid up in bed and you're... Garrett gestured at her dismissively. Well, you're whatever you are. She's delivering a legal notice, Kate said coldly. And if you're smart, you'll take it seriously. Will I? Garrett's smile widened. You see, Mrs. Hale, the thing about men like your husband is that they forget where real power lies. It's not in badges or laws or self-righteous proclamations. It's in money, land, and the men willing to fight for it. Rowan has a badge and some borrowed authority. I have an army. Then prepare to use it, Clara said, surprising herself with the steel in her voice. Because the marshal isn't backing down. Neither am I. Your brother committed murder. He'll answer for it. He's family. I protect family. Garrett stepped closer, and his men shifted with him, hands moving toward weapons. Question is, do you really want to start this fight? Because once it begins, people die. Women especially. Tragic accidents happen all the time out here. Falls from horses, rattlesnake bites, fires that spread faster than anyone expected. It was the same threat from his office visit, but sharper now, more explicit. Clara felt Kate tense beside her, felt the deputies' hands drift toward their guns. This was the moment, the point where words ended and violence began. Start that fight, Clara said quietly, and you'll learn something about women who've survived worse than you. We don't scare easily, we don't break quietly, and we remember every single threat, every insult, every moment when men like you tried to make us disappear. She held Garrett's gaze. I grew up in Philadelphia with a crime boss who makes you look like a schoolyard bully. You think burning a stable and threatening violence is impressive? It's amateur hour. So if you want a war, mister, Garrett, understand that you're not just fighting my husband. You're fighting me. And I've got nothing left to lose. The silence that followed felt like the pause before a thunderstorm. Garrett's smile had finally died, replaced by something colder and far more calculating. Get off my land, he said finally. They rode away slowly, refusing to run even though every instinct screamed at Clara to kick her horse into a gallop and flee. Only when the ranch disappeared behind them did Kate let out a long breath. That, she said, was either the bravest or stupidest thing I've ever seen. I'm voting stupid, Deputy Williams muttered. Clara's hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the reins. The adrenaline that had carried her through the confrontation was draining away, leaving nothing but terror and the sick certainty that she'd just made everything worse. But when they rode back into Black Hollow as the sun set, bloodied and bruised from their long day, Rowan was waiting on the office steps despite Doc Morrison's orders. His head was still bandaged, his face pale with pain, but he was standing, watching. And when Clara dismounted on unsteady legs, he walked to her, slow, deliberate, and pulled her into an embrace that felt less like affection and more like claiming, marking, showing the entire town watching that this woman, this trouble, was his to protect. "What did you do?" he murmured against her hair. "Declared war," Clara whispered back. "I think." "Good," Rowan said, and Clara realized with a shock that he meant it. "Then we fight together." That night, Rowan spread maps across the kitchen table while Clara boiled coffee strong enough to wake the dead. His head wound had stopped bleeding, but the bruising had spread, turning half his face purple and yellow. Doc Morrison had threatened to tie him to a bed if he didn't rest. Rowan had responded by deputizing the doctor and putting him to work gathering intelligence. "Garrett won't wait long," Rowan said, marking locations on the map with a stub of pencil. "He's angry now, and angry men make mistakes. He'll come at us hard and fast, probably within the week." "How many men does he have?" Kate asked from her position by the window. She'd refused to leave since their return from the ranch, positioning herself like a sentry. 30, maybe 40, if he calls in hands from his other properties. Most of them are cowboys, not gunfighters, but they'll follow orders if he pays them enough. Rowan circled Black Hollow on the map. "We have maybe a dozen men who can shoot straight and won't run at the first sign of trouble. Not good odds." "Then we don't fight him head on," Clara said. The words came out before she'd fully thought them through, but once spoken, they felt right. "We make him come to us on our terms." Rowan looked up, studying her. "Explain." "Garrett thinks he's hunting us. What if we're hunting him instead?" Clara moved to the table, looking at the map. Her time watching Crow's operations had taught her things about how criminals thought, how they moved, where they made mistakes. "He wants his brother back. He wants to punish you for the arrest, and he wants me gone because I'm the weakness he thinks he can exploit. What if we give him all three?" "You want to use yourself as bait," Kate said flatly. "I want to use myself as the prize he can't resist." Clara's finger traced a line between Black Hollow and the Garrett Ranch. "We spread word that I'm leaving, that the marriage was a mistake, that I'm scared, that I'm taking the evening train to Denver. Garrett hears about it. And he will, because this town can't keep secrets, and he sends men to intercept me." "And then what?" Rowan's voice was hard. "They take you, kill you, and Garrett's proven his point?" "Then we're waiting for them." Clara met his eyes. "Not just deputies, everyone who can fight. We set the trap, let them spring it, and when they do, we take them all, including any evidence they're carrying that ties Garrett to the jailbreak and the stable fire." The room went silent. Kate pushed off from the window, circling the table to look at the map from different angles. Deputy Williams, who'd been quiet until now, cleared his throat. "It's risky," he said. "If something goes wrong—" "Something's already wrong," Clara interrupted. "Garrett burned our stable and freed a murderer. He's not going to stop until someone stops him. This way we control the battlefield." "She's right," Kate said slowly. "Garrett's arrogant. He'll see a woman running away and think he's won. Won't expect us to be ready." Rowan was quiet for a long time, his fingers drumming on the table, his eyes moving over the map like he was playing out the entire scenario in his head. Finally, he looked at Clara with an expression she couldn't quite read. "If we do this," he said, "you follow orders exactly. No improvising, no heroics. You do what I say when I say it, because one mistake gets people killed." "I understand." "Do you?" He leaned forward. "Because this isn't like riding to Garrett's ranch with armed deputies. This is putting yourself in front of men who want you dead and trusting that we'll get to you before they do. That's a different kind of fear, Clara. The kind that makes you freeze when you need to move, run when you need to stand. If you can't handle that, tell me now." Clara thought about Philadelphia, about the night she'd crept into Crow's office to steal back her father's wages, knowing that if she was caught, she'd disappear into one of his brothels and never emerge. She thought about boarding that train with nothing but lies and stolen money, every mile taking her further from everything she knew. She thought about standing in front of James Garrett and declaring war with nothing but words and will. "I can handle it," she said. "Then we plan," Rowan said, "and we do it right." They worked through the night, mapping every detail. The train left at 7 in the evening, just as the sun began its descent. Clara would make a show of packing, of saying goodbyes, of looking frightened and defeated. Mrs. Brennan would spread word that the marshal's wife couldn't handle frontier life, was running back east where women like her belonged. The gossip would reach Garrett by noon. The ambush site would be Miller's Crossing, a narrow passage where the road to the train station cut between two rocky outcroppings. Perfect cover for deputies. No way to approach except straight down the road. Garrett's men would think they had Clara trapped. Instead, they'd be walking into a bottleneck. What about Michael? Kate asked. Garrett's got him hidden somewhere. If we take down his men but the brother escapes, this was all for nothing. Michael's the key, Rowan agreed. Garrett will want him far from Black Hollow, probably moved him to another property. But if we capture some of his men, they'll talk, especially if they're facing charges themselves. And if they don't, then we make them. Rowan's tone left no room for argument. This ends one way or another. Either Garrett faces justice or I die trying to bring him in. Those are the only options. Clara felt the weight of that statement settle over the room. This wasn't just about her anymore. Wasn't just about surviving or escaping. Rowan was willing to stake everything, his badge, his life, his town, on bringing down a man who'd operated above the law for years. It was foolish and brave in equal measure, and Clara realized with a shock that she'd started to care what happened to him, not just as her protector, as a person. The realization was unwelcome and poorly timed, so she pushed it aside and focused on the maps, the plans, the 100 details that would determine whether they survived the next few days. Dawn came too quickly. Clara forced herself to sleep for a few hours, her body exhausted even as her mind raced. When she woke, Rowan was gone. Back to the office, probably, or making arrangements with his deputies. The house felt emptier without him, and Clara hated that she noticed. She dressed carefully, choosing her most worn dress, the one that made her look defeated and small. Then she packed her carpet bag with enough clothes to make it believable, tucking the money belt with Crow's $87 deep inside. If this went wrong, she'd need that money to run. If it went right, maybe she'd finally be free of it. Mrs. Brennan was waiting when Clara came downstairs, her face carefully arranged in sympathetic concern. "Oh, honey," she said, loud enough for Thomas Fisher to hear from inside his store. "Are you sure about this? Leaving so soon?" "I can't stay," Clara said, pitching her voice to Carrie. "This isn't the life I thought it would be. I'm not strong enough for this place. But the marshal married me out of duty, not love. We both know that." Clara let her voice crack slightly. "I'm going home. Back east where I belong." She could feel Fisher listening, could practically hear him composing the story he'd tell everyone who came through the store. Good. Let the gossip spread like wildfire. Let it reach Garrett before noon. Kate found her an hour later behind the gunsmith shop, practicing with the pistol one last time. Clara's aim had improved. She could hit targets more often than not now, but her hand still shook with recoil, and her shoulder would be bruised for days. "You don't have to do this," Kate said without preamble. "We could find another way." "There isn't another way. You said it yourself. Garrett won't stop until someone stops him." Clara reloaded with movements that were becoming automatic. "And I'm tired of running, tired of being afraid. If this is how I stop, then so be it. You might die. I might have died a dozen times already. At least this time I'm choosing the field." Clara fired, hitting the bottle dead center. It exploded in a spray of glass. "How's Rowan?" "Stubborn as hell. Refused to rest. Been drilling deputies all morning. He's scared, though he'd never admit it." Kate studied Clara with those sharp eyes. "He cares about you, more than he should for a marriage of convenience." "Don't," Clara said. "Don't make this about feelings. It's about survival. Survival and feelings aren't mutually exclusive." Kate loaded her own pistol, fired, and obliterated 2 bottles in quick succession. "But have it your way. Just don't get yourself killed proving a point." The day crawled by with the weight of something inevitable approaching. Clara made her rounds through town, saying goodbye to people who barely knew her, who'd watched her arrival with suspicion and were watching her departure with satisfaction. Only Mrs. Brennan seemed genuinely sad, pressing a packet of food into Clara's hands and whispering, "Be careful, dear, whatever you're really doing." Rowan appeared as the sun began its descent, his face grim. "It's time. Garrett's men have been spotted heading this way. 4 riders moving fast." "Only 4? Clara's stomach clenched. "That's not enough to—" "They're scouts, testing our response. The main force will be waiting along the road." Rowan's hand moved to his gun, checking it for the dozenth time. "Williams and Foster are already in position at Miller's Crossing. Kate's going with you on the wagon as far as the edge of town. Once you're past the last building, you're alone until you reach the crossing." And if they attack before then? They won't. Too many witnesses. Garrett wants this to look like an accident, not a public execution. Rowan's jaw tightened. But Clara, if anything feels wrong, if they approach differently than we planned, you run. Forget the trap. Forget the plan. You just run and don't look back. I won't run. Promise me. His hand caught her arm and the grip was almost painful. Promise me that if this goes bad, you'll save yourself. Clara looked at him, at this hard, scarred man who'd offered her protection when he had no reason to, who'd married her to keep her safe, who was now willing to risk everything to bring down a corrupt rancher. And she lied. I promise. She could tell he didn't believe her, but he nodded anyway. Then, surprising them both, he pulled her close and kissed her. Not the brief, performative kiss from their wedding, but something deeper, more desperate. Something that tasted like fear and determination and goodbye. Don't die, he said against her mouth. I'll be angry if you die. Noted, Claire's voice shook. Don't die yourself. Also noted, Kate appeared with the wagon already loaded with Clara's carpet bag and a rifle tucked under the seat. Time to go. Sun's getting low. The ride through Black Hollow felt like a funeral procession. People watched from windows and doorways, some with satisfaction, others with curiosity, a few with what might have been concern. Clara kept her eyes forward, her posture defeated, playing the role of a woman fleeing a mistake. At the edge of town, Kate pulled the wagon to a stop. This is where I get off. You remember the plan? Keep the horses steady until I reach the crossing. When Garrett's men appear, act scared but don't try to run. Give Rowan time to get into position. And if they shoot first? Then I die. And you tell Rowan I said this was a terrible idea? Clara tried to smile, but it came out wrong. Thank you for teaching me to shoot, for not judging me. I absolutely judged you, Kate said. Just decided you were worth the trouble. She climbed down from the wagon, then paused. Clara, you're tougher than you think. Remember that when things get bad. Then she was gone, melting into the shadows at the edge of town, and Clara was alone with the horses and the setting sun and the growing certainty that she was about to die. She drove the wagon slowly, letting the horses set the pace, her eyes scanning the landscape for any sign of Garrett's men. The road to the train station cut through scrubland dotted with rocks and scraggly bushes, 1,000 places to hide, to watch, to wait. Miller's Crossing appeared ahead, the rocky outcroppings rising like sentinels on either side of the narrow passage. Clara's hands tightened on the reins. This was it. If Rowan and his deputies were in position, they'd be up in those rocks, rifles ready. If they weren't... 3 riders emerged from behind an outcropping, blocking the road. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. She pulled the horses to a stop, forcing herself to look frightened rather than ready. The riders approached slowly, their faces hidden by hat brims and neckerchiefs pulled up against the dust. Mrs. Hale, the lead rider said, his voice muffled. Heading somewhere? The train station. I'm leaving Black Hollow. That's so? He glanced at his companions. Seems like poor timing. These roads aren't safe after dark. A woman alone might meet with an accident. I'll take my chances. Clara's hand moved slowly toward the rifle under the seat, trying to be subtle. I wouldn't do that. The rider's gun was suddenly in his hand, pointed at her chest. Nice and easy now. Come down from that wagon. Boss wants to talk to you. What boss? Clara stalled, her eyes searching the rocks for any sign of Rowan. Nothing. Where were they? Don't play stupid. You know who. The rider gestured with his gun. Down. Now. Clara climbed down, her legs unsteady, her mind racing. This wasn't right. 3 riders, not 4. And they were too calm, too confident, like they knew they weren't walking into a trap, like they'd been warned. The realization hit her like ice water. Someone had betrayed them. Someone had told Garrett about the plan, and now Rowan and his deputies were positioned for an ambush that wasn't coming the way they'd expected. Where's your husband? The rider asked. Hiding in those rocks? We know about Miller's Crossing, Mrs. Hale. We know about the whole damn plan. Clara's blood ran cold. Then why are you here? Because Garrett wants you alive to use as bait. The marshal will come for you, and when he does, we'll be waiting. Not here, somewhere else. Somewhere he won't see coming. The rider smiled, and even through the neckerchief, Clara could see the cruelty in it. So be a good girl and don't make this harder than it needs to be. Movement in the rocks caught Clara's eye. Just a flash. Sunlight on metal, maybe, or a hat shifting position. The deputies were there, they'd heard, which meant they knew the plan had fallen apart. Clara made her decision in the space between heartbeats. She grabbed the rifle from under the wagon seat and fired. The shot went wild. Clara hadn't aimed, had barely pointed, but the effect was instantaneous. The horses bolted, the wagon lurched forward, and the riders' horses reared in panic. One of the men fired back, the bullet whipping past Clara's head close enough to feel the heat. Then the rocks exploded with gunfire. Rowan and his deputies had been waiting for an ambush. What they got was a firefight. The lead rider went down first, his horse screaming as he fell. The second rider wheeled around, trying to flee, and Kate emerged from somewhere, her rifle speaking once, twice. He dropped. The third rider fired at Clara, and she felt the impact before the pain, a burning line across her arm, blood suddenly hot and wet. She fired back, the recoil nearly knocking her over, and missed. Fired again. Missed. The rider was aiming for another shot when Rowan appeared, his pistol drawn, and the rider's head snapped back. Silence crashed down like a physical thing. Clara stood in the middle of the road, her arm bleeding, her ears ringing, the rifle shaking in her hands. 3 bodies lay in the dust. The horses had stopped running, confused and terrified, and Rowan was striding toward her, his face white with fury. "What the hell were you thinking?" he shouted. "You were supposed to wait." "They knew," Clara interrupted. "Someone told them about the ambush. They were going to take me somewhere else, use me to lure you out." Rowan stopped, his expression shifting from anger to calculation. Who knew about the plan? Everyone in this room last night. Kate appeared, checking the bodies with professional efficiency. Plus anyone they might have told. "I didn't tell anyone," Deputy Williams said, climbing down from the rocks. Foster was behind him, both men looking shaken. "We kept it quiet like you ordered." "Then we have a traitor in Black Hollow." Rowan's voice was cold. "Someone who's feeding information to Garrett." Clara's arm was throbbing now, pain cutting through adrenaline. She looked at the bodies, at the blood soaking into the dirt, and felt something twist inside her. She'd killed before. No, that was a lie. She'd never killed anyone. But she'd just fired at a man intending to end his life, and the fact that she'd missed didn't change the intent. "You're bleeding," Rowan said, his anger melting into concern. He holstered his gun and moved to her, examining the wound. "Not deep. Grazed you. You'll have a scar, but you'll live." "Lucky me." Claire's voice sounded distant, like it was coming from someone else. "What now?" "Now we search these bodies and find out what they're carrying. Orders, maybe. Something that connects them to Garrett." Rowan tore a strip from his shirt, wrapping it around Clara's arm with surprising gentleness. "And then we figure out who the hell betrayed us." Kate crouched by the lead rider's body, rifling through his pockets. She pulled out a folded paper, read it, and her face hardened. "Rowan, you need to see this." The paper was a crude map showing Miller's Crossing, the positions Rowan had planned for his deputies, and an X marking where Clara's wagon would be. On the back, in careful handwriting, "They'll be waiting. Ambush the ambush. Take the woman alive. Garrett needs leverage." "This was drawn recently," Rowan said, studying the paper. "Probably this morning, which means whoever drew it knew our plans from last night and had time to get word to Garrett's men." His eyes moved to his deputies. "Williams, Foster, where were you between dawn and noon?" "At the office," Williams said. "Both of us. We didn't leave except to grab food from Mrs. Brennan's." "Mrs. Brennan," Kate's voice was flat. "She's the town gossip. If someone wanted to feed information to Garrett, she'd be the perfect conduit." "No." Clara shook her head, even though the movement made her dizzy. "Mrs. Brennan wouldn't. She's been nothing but kind." "Kindness and loyalty aren't the same thing," Rowan interrupted. "And Garrett has money. Enough money to buy cooperation from people who need it." His jaw tightened. "We'll deal with that later. Right now we have bigger problems." "Such as?" "Such as Garrett now knows we're on to him, his men are dead, and he's going to retaliate hard and fast." Rowan looked at the setting sun, at the shadows growing longer. "We need to get back to Black Hollow. Now, before he hits us while we're scattered." They loaded the bodies onto the wagon. Clara tried not to look at their faces, and started the journey back. Foster rode ahead to warn the town. William stayed behind to cover their retreat. And Clara sat beside Rowan, her arm aching, her mind replaying the moment she'd fired that rifle, trying to reconcile the woman who'd pulled the trigger with the woman who'd arrived in Black Hollow, convinced she was too weak to survive. "You did well," Rowan said quietly. "Back there, when the plan fell apart, I got shot. You improvised. Gave us the opening we needed. That's more than most people could manage their first gunfight." Clara looked at him. "Is it always like this? The fear and the noise and the way everything moves too fast and too slow at the same time?" "Yes. You learn to function through it, but it never really changes." His hand found hers, squeezing briefly. "You saved yourself today, Clara. Saved all of us, maybe. That counts for something." It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like Clara had just stepped off a cliff and was still waiting to hit the ground. Black Hollow was mobilizing when they arrived. Foster had spread the word, and now men were boarding up windows, loading rifles, gathering in clusters to discuss strategy. Mrs. Brennan stood outside her store, her face pale, and Clara saw guilt written clearly there. Rowan saw it too. He pulled the wagon to a stop and climbed down, walking straight to the older woman with purpose in every stride. "How much did he pay you?" Rowan asked. No anger, just cold statement of fact. Mrs. Brennan's face crumpled. $200. He said nobody would get hurt. Just that he needed to know what you were planning, to protect his family. 3 men are dead because of the information you gave him. Rowan's voice could have cut glass. And more are coming. Garrett won't stop now. He can't afford to. "I'm sorry." Sorry doesn't help. Rowan turned away, then back. "Get inside. Lock your door. When this is over, we'll discuss your future in this town. If there is one." Clara climbed down from the wagon, her legs shaky, and found Kate waiting. "How bad is it?" "Bad," Kate said. "Garrett's gathering his men. Word is he's riding with at least 20, maybe more. They'll be here by morning. Then we have tonight to prepare." Rowan was already moving toward the office, his mind clearly working through scenarios. "Everyone who can fight, I want them armed and positioned. Families with children, get them into the boarding house basement. It's the most secure structure we have. And someone find Doc Morrison. We're going to need him." The next hours were a controlled chaos of preparation. Clara found herself loading rifles alongside Kate, her wounded arm protesting but functional. Rowan divided the town into defensive positions, placing deputies and armed citizens where they'd do the most good. The saloon became a makeshift armory. The church, the closest thing Black Hollow had to one, really just a building with benches, became a hospital staging area. And through it all, Clara watched Rowan transform from the cold, tired man she'd married into something else. A leader. Someone people followed not because they had to, but because they believed he could save them. She wondered if he believed it himself. Near midnight, Rowan found her in the office, trying to clean her rifle with one hand while her wounded arm throbbed. He took the weapon from her, finished the job with practiced efficiency, and set it aside. "You should rest," he said. "I can't." Clara looked at him, at the exhaustion etched into his face, the bandage still wrapped around his head from the earlier attack. "None of us can." "No, I suppose not." He sat beside her, and for a moment they were just 2 people in a dark room, waiting for dawn and whatever it would bring. "I need to tell you something, in case I don't get another chance." "Don't." Claire's throat tightened. "Don't say goodbye. Not yet." "I'm not saying goodbye. I'm saying thank you." His hand found hers. "For standing when you could have run. For fighting when you had every reason to flee. For being stronger than either of us expected." "I'm not strong. I'm terrified." "That's what makes it strength." Rowan's thumb traced across her knuckles. "Courage isn't the absence of fear, Clara. It's acting despite it. You've done that every day since you arrived." Clara wanted to believe him. Wanted to believe she was something other than a woman running from her past, making desperate choices that kept leading her deeper into danger. But belief was still hard, trust still fragile, and the dawn coming would test both. "Promise me something," she said. "What?" "If Garrett wins, if this goes wrong, don't let them take me alive. Don't let them use me against you." Rowan's jaw tightened. "That's not going to happen." "Promise me anyway." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded, just once. "I promise. But only if you promise the same. If I go down, you run." You take that money, you get on the first train east or west or wherever, and you survive. That's not fair? No, but it's necessary. His grip tightened on her hand. Someone has to survive to tell the story, Clara. To make sure people know what happened here. That's got to be you. She wanted to argue, to tell him they'd both survive, that dawn would come and they'd somehow win against impossible odds. But lies felt wrong in the darkness, with death waiting just beyond the horizon. So she nodded. I promise. They sat together in silence, hands linked, listening to the sounds of Black Hollow preparing for war. And when the first rays of light touched the eastern sky, Rowan stood, checked his weapons one final time, and walked out to face whatever came. Clara followed, her rifle in her good hand, her wounded arm bound tight, her fear transformed into something harder and colder and infinitely more dangerous. Let Garrett come. Let him bring his army. She'd already survived worse, and if she died today, she'd die fighting rather than running. That had to count for something. They came with the sunrise, silhouettes against the crimson sky, like riders from some ancient nightmare. Clara counted 23 men, maybe more in the dust cloud behind them. James Garrett rode at the front, his expensive suit replaced by range clothes, a rifle across his saddle. This wasn't a negotiation. This was an execution dressed up as justice. Black Hollow held its breath. From her position in the window of the general store, Rowan had insisted she not be at the office, too exposed. Clara could see the townsfolk at their posts. Thomas Fisher behind a water trough with a hunting rifle. Kate on the roof of her shop, prone and steady. Deputy Williams at the far end of the street near the stable. And Rowan, standing alone in the middle of the road, his badge catching the early light. He looked impossibly small against Garrett's assembled force. One man against an army. Clara's finger tightened on her rifle trigger. Garrett pulled his horse to a stop 20 yards from Rowan. His men fanned out behind him, guns visible but not yet drawn. The message was clear. We could end you right now, but we're giving you a chance to surrender. Marshal Hale, Garrett called out, his voice carrying in the morning stillness. I'm here for my brother, and for the woman who murdered 3 of my men. Your men attacked a civilian on a public road, Rowan replied, his voice calm. Mrs. Hale acted in self-defense. As for your brother, he's a fugitive. You're harboring a wanted criminal. Am I? Garrett smiled that pleasant smile that made Clara's skin crawl. Prove it. Show me evidence. Show me witnesses that'll stand up in territorial court. I'll show you a rope if you don't turn him over. The smile widened. Big words from a man outnumbered 20-1. You going to fight all of us, Rowan? You and your shopkeepers and farmers? We both know how this ends. Clara saw Rowan's hand drift toward his gun, saw the tension ripple through Garrett's men. This was the moment. Violence was a breath away, and once it started, it wouldn't stop until one side was dead. Then a voice cut through the standoff. I think you miscounted, Garrett. Kate stood up on her roof, rifle aimed. From other positions around town, more people emerged. Not just the ones Rowan had positioned, but others. Mrs. Brennan with an old shotgun, the blacksmith from 2 streets over, the widow who ran the boarding house, even Thomas Fisher, his hands shaking but his rifle pointed true. They weren't 20 against 1 anymore. They were 20 against 30. Garrett's expression darkened. You're making a mistake, all of you. When this is over, you'll be in chains or dead, Rowan interrupted. Your choice. But either way, this ends today. Does it? Garrett gestured, and 2 of his men rode forward, dragging something between their horses. No, someone. A man, bound and gagged, beaten bloody. Because I brought insurance. Clara's blood went cold. Even from a distance, she recognized Deputy Foster. Found him scouting our camp last night, Garrett said conversationally. Trying to spy. Very dedicated, your deputy. Didn't break under questioning, which I respect. But he'll break under bullets if you don't cooperate. Rowan's face was stone. Let him go. Let Michael go. Can't do that. Then your man dies. Garrett pulled his pistol, pressed it to Foster's head. Count of 3. 1. Wait! Clara heard herself speaking before she'd made the decision, her voice carrying from the store window. Every head turned toward her. Garrett, you want me, right? You want to punish the woman who killed your men? I'm here. Let Foster go and I'll come with you. Clara, no, Rowan started, But she was already moving, stepping out of the store with her rifle lowered, hands visible. "I mean it," she said, walking toward the center of the street. "Let the deputy go. Take me instead. I'm worth more to you anyway. Leverage against the marshal, someone to blame for all of this. Use me." Garrett studied her, his pistol still at Foster's head. Then slowly he smiled. "You know what? That's not a bad trade. The hero deputy for the murdering whore seems fair." "Don't do this," Rowan said quietly, his eyes on Clara. "Please." Clara met his gaze and saw everything he couldn't say. Fear, anger, something that looked dangerously close to care. She smiled, trying to be brave, trying to be the woman he thought she could be. "Get Foster medical attention," she said. "And when this is over, tell Kate she was right. I am tougher than I thought." She walked forward before Rowan could stop her, before she could lose her nerve. Garrett's men grabbed her roughly, took her rifle, bound her hands behind her back with rope that bit into her wrists. Foster was shoved from his horse, collapsing in the dirt. Doc Morrison appeared from somewhere, dragging him to safety. Garrett looked at Clara with satisfaction. "Well then, now we have ourselves a proper negotiation." "We have nothing," Rowan said, his voice dead. "You took a hostage. That's a hanging offense." "Is it? Or is it justice for the men your woman killed?" Garrett hauled Clara up onto his horse in front of him, his arm iron around her waist. "Here's how this works, Marshal. You've got until sundown to produce my brother. Alive, unharmed, with all charges dropped. Otherwise, Mrs. Hale here will have an unfortunate accident. Very tragic. These frontier roads can be so dangerous." "If you hurt her, you'll what? Arrest me? You can barely hold this town together." Garrett kicked his horse, wheeling it around. His men followed, forming a protective wall around them. "Sundown, Rowan. Don't be late." They rode hard, leaving Black Hollow behind in a cloud of dust and fury. Clara's wounded arm screamed as Garrett's horse jolted beneath them, every movement sending fresh pain through her. She tried to remember the landscape, tried to mark directions in case she needed to escape, but everything blurred together: scrubland, rocks, endless sky. After an hour, they reached what looked like an abandoned line shack, barely more than 4 walls and a roof. Garrett dragged Clara inside and threw her against the wall. She hit hard, the impact driving the air from her lungs. "You're stupider than I thought," Garrett said, crouching in front of her. "Walking out here like some kind of martyr? Did you think that would save your husband? All you did was give me exactly what I wanted." Clara spat blood. She'd bitten her tongue in the fall. "What you wanted was leverage. Now you have it. So what are you waiting for?" "For my brother, obviously." Garrett stood, brushing dust from his pants. "Rowan will bring him. He has no choice. And when he does, I'll kill all 3 of you and burn that pathetic town to the ground as a lesson about what happens when people challenge me. You won't get away with it. Territorial authorities will do nothing. I own half the territorial judges and have leverage on the other half. Nobody's coming to save you, Mrs. Hale. You're on your own." He left her there, bound and bleeding, while his men took positions outside. Clara could hear them talking, laughing, placing bets on whether Rowan would actually show up. They didn't sound worried. They sounded confident. She had to find a way out. The rope around her wrists was tight, but not expertly tied. Whoever had bound her had been in a hurry. Clara worked her hands slowly, carefully, feeling for weaknesses. The rough wood wall behind her provided friction. She scraped the rope against it, ignoring the pain as it bit into her skin, focusing on fraying the fibers. Minutes passed. Maybe an hour. Her hands were slick with blood, the rope loosening incrementally. Outside, the sun climbed higher, marking time toward the deadline Garrett had set. Finally, the rope gave. Clara's hands came free, and she flexed her fingers, trying to restore circulation. Now what? She was unarmed, injured, surrounded by armed men. Even if she could slip past them, she had no horse, no supplies, no idea exactly where she was. But she had something else. She had knowledge. 2 years watching Crow's operation had taught her how criminals thought, how they planned, where they made mistakes. Garrett was arrogant, confident in his power, convinced that Rowan would comply with his demands. That arrogance was a weakness. Clara searched the shack looking for anything useful, found nothing except rotting wood and mouse droppings, but the walls were thin, the gaps between boards wide enough to see through. She peered out, counting men. 8 outside, positioned casually. More were probably with Garrett somewhere. Then she heard horses approaching. Clara pressed her eye to a gap in the wall and saw them. Rowan riding with Deputy Williams, and between them, bound and looking furious, Michael Garrett. They'd actually brought him. Relief and terror warred in Clara's chest. Rowan had come, which meant he cared enough to risk everything, but it also meant he was riding straight into Garrett's trap. She had to warn him. Clara kicked at the back wall of the shack, testing its strength. The wood was rotted, weakened by years of weather. She kicked again, harder, and felt it give slightly. Again. The sound was loud, but the men outside were focused on the approaching riders, not on their prisoner. The wall splintered. Clara squeezed through the gap, splinters tearing at her dress, her wounded arm screaming protest. But she was outside, behind the shack, with open ground stretching away. She could run, could save herself like she'd promised Rowan. Instead, she circled toward where the horses were tethered. Garrett and his men were gathering in front of the shack, guns drawn. Rowan pulled his horse to a stop 30 feet away, Michael between him and Williams like a shield. "You came," Garrett called out, sounding genuinely surprised. "Didn't think you had it in you." "I came for my wife," Rowan replied. "Release her, and you can have your brother." "That's not quite how this works." Garrett gestured, and his men raised their rifles. "See, I can't let you leave. Can't let anyone leave who might testify against me. So here's what's going to happen. You're all going to die very tragically in what looks like a shootout. Michael will confirm it was self-defense, and Black Hollow will learn what happens when people challenge the Garrett family." "You're making a mistake," Rowan said quietly. "Am I? Seems like I'm holding all the cards." "You're forgetting one thing." Rowan's eyes flicked past Garrett to where Clara was creeping toward the horses. "My wife doesn't follow instructions well." Garrett turned just as Clara mounted the nearest horse, kicked it hard, and charged straight at the line of armed men. She had no weapon, no plan beyond causing chaos. But sometimes chaos was enough. The horse plowed into the line of men, scattering them, and Rowan used the distraction to draw his pistol and fire. Williams did the same. Michael, still bound, threw himself sideways off his horse, trying to escape the crossfire. Gunfire erupted. Clara felt a bullet whip past her head, another punch into the horse's shoulder. The animal screamed and went down, throwing her. She hit the ground hard, rolling, and came up running toward where Rowan was fighting two men at once. She grabbed a fallen rifle, had no idea if it was loaded, swung it like a club at the nearest man. It connected with his skull with a sickening crack, and he dropped. Rowan shot the other one, then grabbed Clara's arm. "You were supposed to run," he shouted over the noise. "I don't follow instructions well," she shouted back. More of Garrett's men were converging. Williams was down, clutching his leg but still firing. Michael Garrett was crawling toward his brother, screaming something Clara couldn't hear. And James Garrett himself was striding toward them, his pistol raised, his face twisted with rage. "You've ruined everything," he screamed. "Everything!" He fired. The bullet caught Rowan in the shoulder, spinning him around. He went down, and Clara found herself standing between him and Garrett, the empty rifle in her hands, facing down a man who wanted her dead. "You," Garrett said, his gun now pointed at her chest. "All of this because of you, a whore from Philadelphia who couldn't accept her place." "My place?" Clara heard herself laugh, high and slightly hysterical. "My place was whatever men like you decided it should be. My father's debt, Crow's property, your brother's victim. I'm done accepting places I never chose." "Then die standing." Garrett's finger tightened on the trigger. The shot came from behind Clara. Garrett's expression went from rage to surprise to nothing as he collapsed, a hole in his chest. Clara spun to see Kate Donovan lowering her rifle, her face grim. "Followed you from town," Kate said simply. "Figured you'd need backup." Behind her, more riders appeared, townsfolk from Black Hollow, armed and angry, led by Doc Morrison of all people. They'd followed. All of them had followed. The remaining Garrett men, seeing their boss dead and reinforcements arriving, dropped their weapons. The fight drained out of them like water from a broken bucket. It was over. Clara dropped to her knees beside Rowan, her hand shaking as she examined his wound. It was high on the shoulder, bleeding but not fatal if they got him help quickly. He looked up at her, his face pale, and managed a weak smile. "Told you," he said. "Don't follow instructions." "Shut up," Clara said, tears streaming down her face. "Just shut up and don't die." "Working on it." Doc Morrison was there then, pushing Clara aside gently, his hands already working. Kate dealt with the prisoners, binding them efficiently, and Clara sat in the dust, covered in blood and dirt and the remnants of fear, and watched the sun climb toward noon. They'd survived. Somehow, impossibly, they'd survived. The aftermath took days to sort through. Michael Garrett, faced with his brother's death and a dozen witnesses, broke completely and confessed to everything. The arrangement with Deputy Collins, the murder, the jailbreak, all of it. He even revealed where James had kept his ledgers, detailed records of bribes, extortion, and crimes stretching back years. The territorial authorities arrived 4 days later, drawn by news of James Garrett's death. They arrested Michael, collected the ledgers, and interviewed witnesses. Some of them were sympathetic. Others seemed disappointed that the Garrett family's reign had ended so messily, but none of them could ignore the evidence. Clara testified at the inquiry, standing in front of men who looked at her the way people always had, with suspicion, judgment, assessment of her worth. But this time, she met their gazes without flinching. She told them about Philadelphia, about Crow, about arriving in Black Hollow, and finding herself in the middle of a war she hadn't started but had to fight anyway. When she finished, the head investigator studied her for a long moment. "You're the woman who charged armed men on horseback with no weapon." "I had a horse," Clara said, "which got shot out from under you." "Yes." "That's either very brave or very stupid, Mrs. Hale." Clara thought about it. "Both, probably. I'm still figuring out the difference." That got a ghost of a smile from the investigator. In the end, they ruled the deaths justified and cleared Clara of any wrongdoing. She was free, truly free, for the first time in years. Rowan recovered slowly, his shoulder wound healing but leaving him with limited mobility. Doc Morrison warned it might never fully heal, that Rowan would carry the injury the rest of his life. Rowan accepted this with his usual stoicism, though Clara caught him wincing when he thought no one was watching. She stayed with him through the recovery, changing bandages, forcing him to rest, arguing with him about trying to work too soon. They fell into a rhythm that felt almost domestic, Clara cooking meals that were only occasionally edible, Rowan teaching her to read better using old newspapers, both of them avoiding the conversation they needed to have about what came next. Finally, 6 weeks after Garrett's death, Rowan brought it up over breakfast. "You're free now," he said, not looking at her. "The authorities cleared you. Crow's debt isn't enforceable out here, even if he tried to collect. You could leave. Go anywhere." Clara set down her coffee cup. "Is that what you want?" "What I want doesn't matter. We married for protection, tactical reasons. Those reasons don't exist anymore." "So you're saying I should go?" "I'm saying you have a choice now." He finally met her eyes. "When you came here, you didn't have options. Now you do. I won't hold you to vows made under duress." Clara looked at this man who'd offered her protection when he had no reason to, who'd married her publicly to shield her from threats, who'd taken a bullet defending her. This hard, scarred, impossibly stubborn man who saw potential in broken things and believed they could be fixed. "What if I want to stay?" she asked quietly. Rowan's expression flickered, hope quickly masked. "Why would you want that?" "Because for the first time in my life, I'm somewhere I chose to be, with someone who sees me as more than a problem to solve or a debt to collect." Clara reached across the table, taking his hand. "You asked me once what I was running from. Now I'm asking, what would I be running to? Where else would I find someone who looks at me and sees strength instead of weakness?" "You're strong. You always were." "Maybe, but I needed someone to believe it before I could." She squeezed his hand. "I'm not asking for love, Rowan. I know that's not what this is, but partnership that I'll take if you're offering." He was quiet for a long time, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. Then he said, "There's a ranch about 10 miles from here. Owner died last year, no heirs. It's been sitting empty. I've been thinking about buying it, leaving the marshal work to someone younger." "A rancher? Like your advertisement said." "Something like that." A small smile tugged at his mouth. "Thought maybe, if you stayed, we could try actually building what we pretended to have. A life. A home. Nothing fancy, but honest." "Honest sounds good," Clara said. "I'm tired of lies." They bought the ranch with money pooled from Rowan's savings and Clara's $87, the money she'd stolen from Crow, finally used for something other than running. The house needed work, the fences were falling down, and the previous owner had let everything go to seed. But it was theirs, earned through survival and stubbornness, and the kind of partnership forged in fire. Kate visited regularly, ostensibly to check on Rowan's recovery, but really, Clara suspected, to make sure they weren't killing each other. She found them one afternoon fixing a broken gate, arguing about the proper way to set posts, both of them filthy and exhausted and inexplicably happy. "You two are disgusting," Kate announced. "Domestic bliss doesn't suit either of you." "It's not bliss," Clara said, wiping sweat from her forehead. "He's terrible at taking instruction and I'm terrible at giving it. We're just stubborn enough to make it work anyway." "That's called marriage," Kate said dryly. "Welcome to it." Mrs. Brennan never fully regained the town's trust, but she worked to earn back what she could, using the money Garrett had paid her to help rebuild the stable and establish a fund for families in need. Clara saw her at the general store sometimes, and they'd nod to each other with the understanding of people who'd both made mistakes and were trying to do better. Deputy Foster recovered from his injuries and took over as Black Hollow's marshal when Rowan officially retired. He was young, eager, and occasionally needed Rowan's advice, which led to former Marshal visiting town more often than he probably intended. Clara usually came with him, and slowly, incrementally, she became part of Black Hollow's fabric. Not the mysterious stranger or the troubled bride, but simply Clara, the woman who'd fought when fighting mattered. 2 months after they'd moved to the ranch, Clara was in town for supplies when she saw him. A man in an expensive suit, asking questions at the general store. Something about his bearing, the way he moved, made Clara's blood run cold. She knew that walk, had seen it in Crow's men dozens of times, the confidence of someone who'd hurt people and enjoyed it. She slipped back outside, her heart hammering, and found Deputy Foster. "There's a man at Fisher's store, dressed too well for this town, asking too many questions. I think he's from Crow." Foster's hand moved to his gun. "You sure?" "Sure enough that we need to be careful." They approached together, Foster's badge visible, Clara's hand near the pistol Kate had taught her to use. The man saw them coming and smiled. Not pleasant like Garrett, but sharp, predatory. "Mrs. Mercer," he said, "or should I say Mrs. Hale? Silas Crow sends his regards." Clara's stomach dropped, but she kept her voice steady. "Crow has no business here." "Doesn't he? You stole from him. That's business." "The money was my father's wages. I took back what was owed. Crow sees it differently." The man stepped closer, and Foster moved to block him. "He's a patient man, Mrs. Hale. He let you run because running made the hunt more interesting. But the hunt's over now. Time to settle your debts." "The only debt that matters is the one Crow owes every person he's exploited," Clara said. "Tell him I'm not coming back. Tell him I'm not afraid of him anymore. And tell him if he sends anyone else, they won't walk away." The man laughed. Bold words from a woman who couldn't defend herself 3 months ago. 3 months ago, I was alone and afraid. Clara met his eyes. "I'm neither of those things now, so take your message back to Philadelphia and don't return. This is your only warning." For a moment, the man looked like he might push further. Then he glanced at Foster's gun, at the people gathering on the street, Kate among them, rifle in hand, and reassessed. "Crow will hear about this. I'm counting on it." He left on the next train, and Clara watched it disappear into the distance, carrying her past with it. Crow might send others, might never let the debt go. But Clara wasn't the same woman who'd fled Philadelphia in fear. She'd found something here. Not safety exactly, but the will to stand against threats instead of running from them. That night, she told Rowan about the encounter. He listened without interruption, his face grave, and when she finished, he said simply, "If Crow comes, we'll handle it. Together." "It's my fight." "No." His hand found hers. "It's ours." That's what partnership means. Clara thought about that word, partnership. Not love, not romance, but something potentially more enduring. Two people choosing to stand together not because they had to, but because fighting alone was harder and lonelier and offered no reward beyond survival. "I need to tell you something," she said, "about why I really stayed." "You don't have to." "I do." Clara took a breath. "When I arrived here, I was running. From Crow, from debt, from a life where I was never going to be more than a burden or a commodity. You offered me protection, which I needed. But what you gave me was something else. You looked at me, this woman everyone else dismissed or judged or used, and you saw someone worth defending. Not because of how I looked or what I could offer, but because I was here and I was trying. That changed everything. Rowan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I saw someone who reminded me of myself. After the war, I came back broken, violent. Didn't think I was worth much beyond the badge and the gun. Black Hollow gave me a chance to be more than that. When you stepped off that train, I saw the same desperation I'd felt. Wanted to give you the same chance I'd been given. To be more than our worst moments. Something like that. He smiled, brief and genuine. You exceeded expectations, Mrs. Hale. So did you, Marshall. They sat together on the porch of their half-fixed ranch house, watching the sun set over land that was theirs, and Clara felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Not happiness, exactly. Contentment was too simple a word. It was more like peace. The knowledge that tomorrow would be hard, would require work and compromise, and probably more arguments about how to properly set fence posts, but that she'd face it with someone who believed she was capable of facing it. Life at the ranch settled into patterns. Morning chores, mending fences, arguing about everything from how to train horses to what constituted an edible meal. Clara learned ranching the way she'd learned everything else in Black Hollow, through trial, error, and stubborn refusal to quit. Rowan proved surprisingly patient as a teacher, though his methods were unorthodox and occasionally involved Clara doing something wrong repeatedly until she figured out the right way through sheer frustration. They fought sometimes. Clara had opinions about everything, and Rowan had spent too many years giving orders to suddenly embrace collaborative decision-making. But they learned to fight fair, to say what they meant instead of what they thought the other wanted to hear, to apologize when wrong and hold ground when right. Kate visited one evening and found them working on the books, trying to figure out if they could afford to buy more cattle before winter. They were arguing about numbers, both of them exhausted and ink-stained, and Kate watched them for a full minute before announcing her presence. You two realize you're actually married now, right? She said. Not just legally, actually married. Clara and Rowan looked at each other, then back at Kate. What are you talking about? Clara asked. Kate gestured at them, at the shared space and shared work, and the comfortable way they occupied each other's presence. When you got married, it was tactical. Now you're partners. That's different. Is it? Rowan asked. Yes, you idiot. It means you care. Kate shook her head. I'm not saying you're in love or anything nauseating like that, but you've built something real here. Might want to acknowledge it before life gets complicated again. She left them with that observation, and Clara sat in the silence that followed, thinking about words like love and partnership and what they meant to people who'd never expected to have either. She might have a point, Rowan said finally. About which part? The caring part. He looked at her, his expression softer than Clara was used to seeing. I do, care. More than I planned to when this started. Clara's throat tightened. That makes two of us. So what do we do about it? Nothing. Clara reached for his hand. We keep doing what we're doing, building something, being honest, fighting when we need to, and standing together when it matters. That's enough. Is it? For me it is. For now. She squeezed his hand. Ask me again in a year. A year? I'm not going anywhere. You're stuck with me. Rowan smiled, and it transformed his face into something younger, less burdened. Stuck with you. There are worse fates. The seasons changed. Winter came hard, testing everything they'd built. Pipes froze. Cattle needed constant attention, and the house that had seemed adequate in summer proved drafty and cold when snow piled against the walls. But they survived it together, huddled near the stove on the worst nights, planning improvements for spring, arguing about everything and nothing. Spring brought floods, then drought. Summer brought heat that turned the grassland brown. Through it all, Clara learned what frontier life really meant. Not adventure or escape, but endless work punctuated by small victories and smaller disasters. She learned to deliver a calf, to shoot rattlesnakes without flinching, to read weather in the sky and mood in the way Rowan held his shoulders. Black Hollow changed too. New families arrived, drawn by news that the Garrett influence was gone. A real church was built. The boarding house expanded. The town grew from a desperate frontier settlement into something approaching a community, and Clara found herself part of that growth, organizing a school, helping establish a proper cemetery. standing as witness at weddings and funerals alike. She wrote to Philadelphia exactly once, not to Crow, but to the girl who'd helped her write those first letters to Rowan. Clara sent money, more than she'd paid for the letters, less than they'd been worth, and a note that said simply, "Thank you for the lies that led to truth." She never heard back, but she hoped the girl had found her own way out. 2 years after Clara arrived in Black Hollow, on a morning that felt like any other, Rowan asked her a question over breakfast. "Do you regret it? Any of it?" Clara thought about Philadelphia, about Crow, about the woman she'd been who'd believed herself unworthy of anything better than servitude and fear. She thought about the woman she'd become, scarred, rough-handed, stronger than she'd ever imagined possible. "I regret the things I had to do to survive before I got here," she said finally. "The lies, the stealing, the years spent afraid. But coming here, marrying you, fighting Garrett? No, I don't regret any of that. Even though it nearly got you killed? Especially because of that." Clara met his eyes. "I was dying anyway, back east. Just slower. At least here, I lived before the dying started. That counts for something." "It counts for everything," Rowan said quietly. They sat together in comfortable silence, finishing breakfast, preparing for another day of work. And Clara realized that this ordinary morning, this simple life, was what she'd been running toward all along without knowing it. Not escape, not safety, but the chance to build something with her own hands, to stand alongside someone who saw her as an equal, to prove that strength and worth weren't determined by the circumstances of birth or body or past mistakes, but by the choice to keep standing when falling was easier. She thought about the woman who'd stepped off the train in Black Hollow, desperate and afraid, convinced she was unworthy of anything beyond survival. That woman was gone, transformed not into someone perfect, but into someone real. Someone who'd learned that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. That partnership wasn't about completing each other, but about standing together when the world tried to push you apart. That home wasn't a place you found, but something you built, one difficult day at a time. The mail came once a week, delivered by a rider who made the circuit between settlements. 3 years after Clara's arrival, he brought a telegram from Philadelphia. Clara's hands shook as she opened it, expecting news from Crow. Instead, it was from a territorial marshal she'd never heard of. "Silas Crow arrested, federal charges, trial next month. Your testimony requested but not required." Clara read it 3 times. Then she walked outside to where Rowan was working with a new horse, handed him the telegram, and waited while he read. "What do you want to do?" he asked. Clara thought about it, about going back to Philadelphia, facing Crow in a courtroom, testifying about his crimes, about the satisfaction of seeing him brought low, about the risk of opening old wounds. "Nothing," she said finally. "Let the federal marshals handle it. I'm done with him, done with that life." "You're sure?" "I'm sure." She took the telegram back, tore it in half, and let the pieces scatter in the wind. "My testimony isn't required. Neither is my revenge. He's someone else's problem now." Rowan studied her for a moment, then nodded. "All right. Then we've got a fence that needs mending in the west pasture. I'll get the tools." That was it. No dramatic confrontation. No final reckoning with the man who'd haunted her. Just the decision to let go and move forward. To choose the life she'd built over the past she'd escaped. 6 months later, another telegram arrived. Crow convicted. Sentenced to 20 years. Case closed. Clara kept that one. Tucked it in a drawer with other important papers. The deed to the ranch, their marriage certificate, the letter from the territorial authority clearing her of wrongdoing, evidence of a life built on foundations of survival and stubbornness, and the kind of love that grew slowly from shared work and shared struggle. Because somewhere along the way, without planning it or naming it, Clara had fallen in love with Rowan Hale. Not the desperate, consuming love of romantic stories, but something steadier and deeper. The love of knowing someone's flaws and choosing them anyway. Of trusting someone to stand beside you when standing was hard. Of building a future one difficult day at a time with someone who believed you were worth the effort. She told him one night in their 4th year together, after they'd finished dinner and were sitting on the porch watching stars emerge. "I love you," she said, simple and direct. "Thought you should know." Rowan was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Took you long enough to figure it out. You knew? Suspected. You're not subtle, Clara. But he was smiling. I love you too. Have for a while. Just seemed important to let you come to it yourself. Why? Because you needed to know it was real. That it wasn't just gratitude or convenience or any of the other reasons people convince themselves they feel things they don't. His hand found hers. What we have is real, messy and difficult and built on probably the worst possible foundation, but real. The worst possible foundation? Murder, debt, tactical marriage, and a woman who can't follow instructions to save her life. He was definitely smiling now. If we can build something lasting from that, we can survive anything. Clara laughed, the sound carrying into the night. That's possibly the least romantic thing anyone's ever said. You want romance? Read one of those books Mrs. Brennan keeps trying to lend you. You want truth? Stay here with me. Truth is better, Clara decided. Truth is always better. They sat together under the stars, hands linked, two people who'd found each other through desperation and luck, and the kind of stubborn refusal to quit that defined frontier life. They'd survived things that should have broken them, violence, betrayal, wounds both physical and otherwise. They'd built a life from nothing in a place that demanded everything. And they'd learned something that Clara wished she could tell every woman who'd ever been dismissed or judged or told they were less than they were. That strength wasn't something you were born with or granted by circumstance. It was something you built, one choice at a time, in the moments when giving up was easier. That love, real love, wasn't about perfection or completion. It was about finding someone who saw you clearly, flaws, scars, difficult past and all, and chose to stand beside you anyway. That home wasn't a place you found, but something you created through work and compromise, and the decision to keep showing up day after day, even when it was hard. The woman who'd stepped off the train in Black Hollow, frightened and desperate, convinced she was worth nothing beyond the debt she carried. That woman was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, scarred but unbroken, who'd learned that survival was just the beginning. That real living started when you stopped running and started building. When you looked at the hard parts of yourself and others and decided they were worth fighting for anyway. Years later, when travelers passed through and asked about the Hale Ranch, people in Black Hollow would tell different versions of the story. Some said Clara had been running from the law. Others claimed she was a wealthy woman slumming in frontier life. A few remembered the truth, that she'd been desperate and afraid, that she'd arrived the same day as a murder, that she'd married the marshal in a tactical alliance that somehow became real. But the story everyone agreed on was the ending. How Clara Hale, once Mercer, once nothing, once just another woman trying to survive, had stood in front of armed men and declared she was done accepting the places other people assigned her. How she'd fought when fighting was necessary and built when building was possible. How she'd transformed from someone running from her past into someone creating her future. And how she'd done it not by becoming someone different, but by becoming more fully herself. Difficult, stubborn, imperfect, and absolutely unwilling to quit. That was the story. That was the truth. And in the end, it was enough.